This episode of the Y-Files is brought to you by Henson Shaving. Hey, thanks for clicking on a compilation episode. I know, another compilation. But I promised you a new video last week, and you got it, and you're getting a new one next week. I promise, we're getting caught up. In the next few weeks, we'll have more CIA cover-ups, some UFO stories. I'd also like to talk about portals and stargates.
Yes!
I think you're gonna like what's coming. So today we're revisiting ancient mysteries, and we do a lot of those on the channel, but I try to keep these compilations under or about 3 hours, so maybe we'll have to follow up with part 2 at some point.
We're gonna need more than that.
We probably are. All right, we're gonna start with the ancient city found in the Grand Canyon. A man named G.E. Kincaid allegedly found an ancient underground city full of relics that he thought looked Egyptian or maybe from the Far East, but they were definitely thousands of years old. It was even covered in local newspapers, but then Kincaid called the Smithsonian, then suddenly the story disappears.
The Smithsonian covers up a lot of stuff.
They do. Their shenanigans are sprinkled all over the channel, and they have millions of artifacts that we're just not allowed to see. And don't try to visit the part of the canyon where this ancient city allegedly is, because if you do, out of nowhere, you're gonna see unmarked planes and black helicopters, and I'm gonna show you this in the episode.
Hey, since we fund the Smithsonian, shouldn't we be able to audit them anytime we want?
Well, I think we should be able to audit any part of the government we want. It's our money.
Audit the Smithsonian and audit the Fed.
Amen, brother.
Hang on, honey, hang on. I'm gonna deal with it. Just give me a second. Will you calm down? Hey, human!
What are you doing?
I'm glad you're there. Look, I'm in the midst of an emergency. I need to borrow your car, $2,000, and 2 pair of your wife's pantyhose.
What is going on? You were supposed to be here 2 days ago,
but there's been extenuating circumstances.
Extenuating circumstances.
It means beyond my control.
I know what it means.
Okay, so car, cash, pantyhose, stat.
Just calm down a minute. What is the emergency?
Gertie and I have a photo shoot for the Modern Goldfish.
What the heck is the Modern Goldfish?
Hello, it's a goldfish lifestyle magazine. You haven't seen copies of it in my bathroom?
Yeah, I don't go into your bathroom. I was in there 6 months ago and I'm still in therapy.
What a snowflake. So the Modern Goldfish is doing a profile on me, and I got my Rolex, my bespoke suit, and now I just need a nice close shave.
What does any of this have to do with me?
Well, I need $2,000 for disposable razors.
$2,000 for razors?
Razors are expensive, and Gertie also needs a shave. I'm not using her razors again. You ever try to shave your face after your wife uses your razor for her legs?
Well, yeah, the razor gets dull.
Well, imagine your wife's legs were the size of a camel hump.
I don't want to imagine that.
Well, I used one of Gertie's razors, and I thought I was going to rip one of my gills off. I don't want to damage my moneymaker.
God forbid. Look, you don't need any of those disposable razors. Just try Henson Shaving.
Oh, is that today's sponsor?
It sure is. Henson Shaving is a family-run aerospace business that makes a precision quality safety razor. The Henson AL13 has a cost of ownership that's way less than disposable or electric razors. It's completely plastic-free, and the replacement blades cost about 10 cents each, so you can always have a safe, close shave.
Ooh, this sounds fantastic.
It is, and there aren't any subscription programs or monthly deliveries, just a solid, long-lasting, dependable razor. Click the link in the description to get your very own Henson AL13 and use the code THE-Y-FILES to get 100 free blades with your order. That'll give you 3 to 5 years worth of shaves.
Okay, I'm on it, but look, I'm still gonna need those pantyhose.
I know I'm gonna regret asking this, but why do you need a pair of pantyhose?
2 pairs.
Why do you need them?
Well, why do you think? After Gertie shaves her legs, she gets cold. Have you ever seen chicken skin on a camel's legs? It ain't pretty. So tell your wife to make with the pantyhose too sweet. What is it, baby? What is it? Hang on, I'll ask. Hey, yes, so, she wants you to make sure they're fishnets.
In 1908, President Teddy Roosevelt wanted to declare the Grand Canyon off limits to all timber and mining operations. It would take another 11 years for Congress to designate the Grand Canyon a national park. Sensing a final opportunity for adventure, explorer G.E. Kincaid took a boat down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon. The canyon was rich in minerals like gold, silver, and copper, and Kincaid wanted to see what he could find before the area was closed off for good. About 40 miles upriver from the El Tovar Crystal Canyon, Kincaid saw stains in the sediment formation about 2,000 feet up. He tied off the boat and got out to investigate. Kincaid couldn't find a trail, but after a short hike, he found something interesting covered in desert brush. Steps, hundreds of them, carved in sandstone, steps that wound their way up to a high shelf on the side of the canyon. He followed the steps until he came across a cavern entrance, an entrance that was clearly man-made. Kincaid entered the cavern and turned on his flashlight. On the walls, he saw writing, but it wasn't English or Native American writing. It was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Kincaid lifted his flashlight and saw that the tunnel ran far into the distance. He didn't realize it at the time, but this was only the beginning. When G.E. Kincaid tied off his small wooden boat to investigate the strange coloration of the rock wall, he was hoping to find clues that would lead him to a mineral deposit. He wasn't expecting to find hieroglyphics. When Kincaid noticed chisel marks in the walls, he drew his pistol, turned on another light, and slowly walked deeper into the gloom. He kept detailed notes of everything he saw.
The main passageway is about 12 feet wide, narrowing to 9 feet toward the farther end. About 57 feet from the entrance, the first side passages branch off to the right and left, along which on both sides are a number of rooms about the size of ordinary living rooms of today, though some are 30 by 40 feet square. These are entered by oval-shaped doors and are ventilated by round air spaces through the walls into the passages. The walls are about 3 feet 6 inches in thickness. The passages are chiseled or hewn as straight as could be laid out by an engineer. The ceilings of many of the rooms converge to a center. The side passages near the entrance run at a sharp angle from the main hall, but toward the rear they gradually reach a right angle in direction.
G.E. Kincaid now realized he was in a huge complex. He estimated that as many as 50,000 people could have lived here. In some rooms, he found granaries with shelves of glazed pottery, many of which still contained seeds. He found cooking areas and a huge dining hall. The rooms were full of ancient artifacts. Kincaid carefully wrapped a few small metal and ceramic objects for later study. Another large room Kincaid described as an area for metalwork, a technology that should not have existed in this area.
Here are found tools of all descriptions made of copper. These people undoubtedly knew the lost art of hardening this metal, which has been sought by chemicals for centuries without result. On a bench running around the workroom was some charcoal and other material probably used in the process. There's also slag and stuff similar to mat, showing that these ancients smelted ores, but so far no trace of where or how this was done has been discovered, nor the origin of the ore.
G.E. Kincaid explored the underground complex for several hours, still having no idea when this place was used, what it was used for, or who the builders were. Then he came across another large room, a crypt. The crypt had shelf upon shelf and row upon row of mummies, dozens of them. At this point, G.E. Kincaid realized that if he was going to explore this entire underground city, he was going to need help. G.E. Kincaid sent a few artifacts to the Smithsonian along with his notes of what he found. He requested financial and logistical support for what he felt was the most significant archaeological discovery ever made. The Smithsonian agreed. A few weeks later, Professor S.A. Jordan arrived with a team of about 40 scientists, researchers, and laborers to excavate and explore the ancient underground city. Now with more lights and manpower, the scientists realized that the cave system layout wasn't random. It was a symmetrical, deliberate design. The tunnels all led to a central chamber. In the chamber was a large statue of what Kincaid thought looked like Buddha.
Like butter.
Buddha.
What I say?
Over 100 feet from the entrance is the cross hall, several hundred feet long, in which are found the idol or image of the people's god sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower or lily in each hand. The cast of this face is oriental, and the carving in this cavern. The idol almost resembles Buddha, though the scientists are not certain as to what religious worship it represents. Taking into consideration everything found thus far, it is possible that this worship most resembles the ancient people of Tibet.
No, I didn't think we were allowed to say Oriental. Are we bringing that back?
We're not. This was written over 100 years ago. So.
Oh, right, when we had freedom of speech.
No, Oriental in this context just means Eastern.
Ah.
Because of this discovery, Kincaid's team started calling the complex the Citadel. The crypt was one of the bigger rooms discovered. Now, with enough light, Kincaid was able to fully describe what he saw.
The walls slant back at an angle of about 35 degrees. On these are tiers of mummies, each one occupying a separate hewn shelf. At the head of each is a small bench, on which is found copper cups and pieces of broken swords. Some of the mummies are covered with clay, and all are wrapped in a bark fabric. The urns or cups on the lower tiers are crude, while as the higher shelves are reached, the urns are finer in design, showing a later stage of civilization. It is worthy of note that all the mummies examined so far have proved to be male, no children or females being buried here. This leads to the belief that this exterior section was the warriors' barracks.
Kincaid, Jordan, and the Smithsonian team explored the entire cave complex. They were overwhelmed with evidence that this was not some faraway temple occupied by a few priests. This was a huge city lived in by thousands of men, women, and children for hundreds or possibly thousands of years. The question nobody could answer was, who were they? By the end of the expedition, G.E. Kincaid and Professor Jordan's team had discovered hundreds of rooms, barracks, granaries, metalworking shops, temples, and many, many living quarters. Though most of the rooms were empty, thousands of artifacts were found. They found swords and shields made of copper, bronze, and a gray metal that scientists couldn't identify. They thought it looked like platinum. They found pottery, urns, utensils for cooking, small yellow stones called cat's eyes, and large stone tablets, all engraved with hieroglyphics.
On all the urns or walls over doorways and tablets of stone which were found by the image are the mysterious hieroglyphics, the key to which the Smithsonian Institute hopes yet to discover. The engraving on the tablets probably has something to do with the religion of the people. Similar hieroglyphics have been found in southern Arizona. Among the pictorial writings, only 2 animals are found. One is of prehistoric type.
Even with all the relics and all the writing Kincaid and Jordan found, they were still no closer to determining who built the citadel in the Grand Canyon. They thought some of the statues looked Tibetan, but they weren't quite right. They thought the writing looked Egyptian. Again, that wasn't quite right. There were experts on site, none of whom could identify the statues or translate any of the text. But there were 2 things that the researchers could agree on. One, the civilization that built the citadel was very advanced, far more advanced than the native tribes that occupied the area for a few thousand years. This now lost civilization worked bronze many years before the Bronze Age began. They understood division of labor and agriculture when every other society on Earth was presumably still hunting and gathering. These are discoveries that went against everything that was taught in mainstream archaeology and anthropology. A civilization like this shouldn't exist.
Oh, what was the second thing?
What?
Well, you said the eggheads agreed on 2 things. What was the second thing?
Right. They agreed that the civilization that built the citadel in the Grand Canyon didn't emerge there locally. This civilization arrived there from the other side of the world. Kincaid and Professor Jordan sent boxes of artifacts and books full of notes and drawings back to the Smithsonian, along with their hypothesis that an ancient civilization existed in the Grand Canyon thousands of years before Native Americans arrived in North America. These people were technologically advanced, educated, skilled, and spiritually complex. And these people originated somehow in Egypt or Asia. Kincaid wanted more resources and a larger team to help them research the citadel and search the Grand Canyon for more evidence of this lost civilization. Their request was denied, and G.E. Kincaid and Professor S.A. Jordan were never heard from again.
Son of a b-
In northern Arizona is one of the most spectacular natural wonders on Earth, the Grand Canyon. Carved over millions of years by the Colorado River, the Grand Canyon is more than just a pretty landscape and a spot for tourists to take selfies. It's a place of deep spiritual significance for the people who've lived in the area. The Hopi, Navajo, Zuni, Apache, and several other tribes have lived around the Grand Canyon for several thousand years. They still do. Hopi mythology says that from the Grand Canyon, the first people of the world entered. The story says that many thousands of years ago, a reptilian race emerged.
Lizard people!
Yep,
Hey, how many times do lizard people have to come up in these stories before you believe in him?
I guess I'm gonna need a few more.
Lizard people are gonna keep popping up. You'll see.
Thousands of years ago, a reptilian race,
Lizard people.
lizard people, emerged from the Grand Canyon and changed into humans.
Lizard people are shapeshifters.
That would seem to be true. Other Pueblo cultures like the Zuni and the Acoma have similar legends that there were people there before the tribes.
Lizard people legends?
Well, some legends say reptilians were there. Other legends say a race of giants were there.
Ooh.
And there are rumors that skeletons of giants have been discovered all over the western United States, but the evidence has been suppressed.
Suppressed by who?
The Smithsonian.
Of course.
Something I've learned from doing the show is that all myths and legends do carry a little bit of truth. We already have evidence that people landed in North America before Columbus. The Vikings famously explored and settled parts of Newfoundland 500 years before the quote-unquote New World was quote-unquote discovered. And there's growing evidence that ancient Chinese explorers landed in North and South America before the Vikings. But landing on the east or west coast of America is one thing. Getting to the Grand Canyon is a whole other thing. How could people get there? And even if they could, how did they have the technology to excavate millions of tons of rock in order to build an entire underground city? Well, we may have known the answer to that question for 1,000 years. Traveling from Europe and Asia to America thousands of years ago was almost impossible. Almost. Many brave people did it. But traveling to the Grand Canyon is a much more difficult task than landing on a California beach. To get to and build in the Grand Canyon requires technology. The Hopi have a very intriguing legend about the ant people. These are humanoid creatures that are smaller than humans with pale skin and large eyes like an insect.
Aliens.
According to legend, a series of cataclysms hit the earth many thousands of years ago.
Younger Dryas.
The Hopi were on the verge of being destroyed. A sky god emerged from what they called a moving star.
UFO.
The sky god brought the Hopi to the ant people, who escorted them to underground caves for protection. The sky god then got back into his moving star and flew off above the clouds. The Paiute have a legend about the Havmusuvs. They're usually described as being humanoid in shape with golden skin and large eyes.
Aliens.
They lived in a vast underground city and traded with faraway people. They possessed weapons that the Paiute described as silver tubes that shot lightning and can kill a man instantly.
Phases.
And the most interesting part of the Havmusuv legend? They supposedly flew silver canoes in the sky.
UFOs.
These craft made a humming sound and could maneuver like an eagle and move at great speeds. Most ancient cultures have a flood myth. They describe a global disaster that melted the ice caps and caused sea level to rise 400 feet. Entire cities were wiped out, maybe even entire continents.
Atlantis.
Most of these flood myths also talk about how, after the waters receded, a godlike people came down from the sky. These gods gave humans the gift of civilization and taught them things they had forgotten before the Great Flood. Things like writing, astronomy, and agriculture. Could the city in the Grand Canyon be evidence of this time in history? And if it is, why would anyone want to suppress it? All the information in today's episode comes from 2 front-page articles from the Phoenix Gazette published in 1909. In the years since, mainstream researchers have decided that the articles were a hoax, a fantastic story designed to sell newspapers.
19th century clickbait.
Yep.
The media hasn't changed much.
Unfortunately, that's true. But many people believe the story is real, and the Smithsonian is covering it up.
Smithsonian Public Relations, Marion speaking.
Hold on. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? I'm here. Sorry, I was on hold a long time.
How can I help you?
They transferred me to Marion.
Yes, this is Marion.
Okay, great. My name is AJ, and I'm with the Y-Files. We're a YouTube channel that covers mysteries.
Did you say you're from YouTube?
The Y-Files is a channel on YouTube, yes.
Okay.
Okay, I wanted to talk to you about an article that was in the Phoenix, Arizona Gazette in 1909, and they sent me to you. I was hoping to ask you a couple of questions about that.
Okay, let me stop you. No Egyptian artifacts of any kind have ever been found in North or South America.
Sounds like you've given that speech before.
Yes, I get this call a couple of times a year. I can tell you that the Smithsonian has never been involved in anything like this in the Grand Canyon or anywhere.
So, G.E. Kincaid?
There's no record of anyone by that name ever working for the Smithsonian. The whole thing is a hoax.
Yeah, that's the prevailing belief, but the Smithsonian has been accused of covering this up, so...
Yeah, I don't have a response to that.
You probably don't want to talk about giants or giant skeletons, huh?
Goodbye.
That's the official story. Kincaid's cave is a hoax, so no reason to try and find it, nothing to see here. Even Kincaid himself wanted to keep people out.
First, I would impress that the cavern is nearly inaccessible. The entrance is 1,486 feet down the sheer canyon wall. It is located on government land and no visitor will be allowed there under penalty of trespass. The scientists wish to work unmolested, without fear of archaeological discoveries being disturbed by curio or relic hunters. A trip there would be fruitless, and the visitor would be sent on his way.
Whether at the request of the Smithsonian or just to protect his find, it was clear that Kincaid wanted to dissuade people from finding the citadel. But even over 100 years later, that wouldn't stop people from trying. And some of those people, they say they found it. Jerry Wills and his wife Kathy have been studying the Kincaid Cave mystery for years. Their approach was find the original base camp of the explorers, which would lead them to the cave. After years of research and exploring the area where G.E. Kincaid said he found the cave, Jerry and Kathy found a location covered in artifacts from that time. And on the canyon wall just below this area, they believe is the entrance to the underground city. Exploring is difficult though. The entire area where the cave is supposed to be is designated off-limits by the federal government.
Yo, I saw that coming.
About 1,000 caves have been discovered in the Grand Canyon, many of them man-made, but only about 30 have been mapped, and many of those have been sealed.
Ooh, I close them off.
Oh, for your safety.
Oh, that's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, I don't buy the safety excuse either. There are plenty of people who'd be willing to take the risk, and they'd be willing to sign a waiver that says the government isn't responsible if something happens. In fact, people have tried this. The government still says no, it's too dangerous.
How nice of the government to look out for us.
Isn't that nice? Then why is it legal to jump out of a plane or ride a roller coaster or drive a car? Some things in life are dangerous, but they're still worth doing. Some other caves in the Grand Canyon have been blocked by steel gates. They say this is to protect the bat population.
Whoa, did you say bats? We have to protect the bats?
That's what they say.
Well, haven't bats caused enough problems these last few years? Allegedly.
Still, people are willing to risk a fine or imprisonment to find the lost city in the Grand Canyon. But anyone who goes looking should expect a response. When Jerry and Kathy's team tried to explore the area, suddenly an unmarked plane appeared. Clearly, they were being watched. Despite this part of the Grand Canyon being a no-fly zone, and the fact that no aircraft is allowed to fly below the rim, a plane appeared. Jerry Wills is convinced this was a warning. His team was unable to continue their expedition. Exploring the cave from above is almost impossible. But what about exploring it from below, as G.E. Kincaid did? Another group of explorers tried this. As they approached the location, a black helicopter showed up. Not a tourist helicopter, not even a black civilian helicopter, an Apache combat helicopter. When this team explored the area above, looking for the ventilation shafts Kincaid wrote about, and possibly a way down, they found cement blocks in the middle of nowhere. Some of these blocks are platforms near the edge of the rim with hardware and anchors that would be used to assist mountaineers. When asked about this, the authorities say these are reinforcing structures to prevent rock falls. Also in this forbidden zone, rock formations have unusual names. There's Isis Temple, Tower of Set, Horus, the Cheops Pyramid, and Ra. There's also the Manu Temple, the Buddha Temple, the Krishna Temple, and the Shiva Temple, and many more names that refer to ancient Egyptian and Hindu cultures, cultures that specifically have myths about a god helping civilization after the Great Flood. The official word is, the fact that these names exist within the Grand Canyon's no-go zone is a coincidence. But I don't really believe in those. Do you? David Hatcher Childress is a French author who's published 200 books. He often covers ancient mysteries. He believes the United States government is actively suppressing archaeological discoveries. He mentions that while the film Raiders of the Lost Ark is fiction, the final scene showing the warehouse is close to reality. That the Smithsonian, an independent federal agency, is hiding some of the most important discoveries made in the Americas. He says the cover-up began in 1881 with famous geologist John Wesley Powell. Powell appointed Cyrus Thomas the director of the Eastern Mound Division of the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology. When Thomas came to the Smithsonian, he believed there was a race of mound builders that were distinct from and arrived before the American Indians. This school of thought is called diffusionism. which says throughout history, there's been a widespread dispersion of culture and civilization, even across great distances. The Smithsonian took the opposite approach. It promoted isolationism, which says most civilizations are isolated from each other and have little contact, especially when separated by large bodies of water. It was held that the advanced and highly populated civilizations of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys were rare, and that they didn't have contact with other advanced cultures like the Aztecs, the Toltecs, or the Maya. But the Mississippi River runs from Canada all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. To say these cultures were isolated is like saying that people in the Black Sea had no contact with people in the Mediterranean. That's ridiculous. When ancient mounds of the American Midwest are examined, they show the existence of a complex culture, cities larger than those in Europe at the time. They also show burials of extremely tall people, sometimes 7 or 8 feet tall. When the Spiro mounds were excavated in the 1930s, 7 and 8 foot tall skeletons were found, at a time when the average height of a human male was about 5'6". Those skeletons have been lost. In 1892, stone coffins were discovered in Alabama by Frank Burns during a geological survey. The coffins were about 7.5 feet long, hollowed out by fire and metal chisels. The findings were sent to the Smithsonian. In 1984, this report was found by researcher Frederick J. Pohl. He asked the Smithsonian about this. They said, "We have not been able to find the specimens in our collections, though records show that they were received."
Well, how do you lose giant stone coffins?
That weighed several tons? I don't know.
And never underestimate the incompetence of the federal government.
8 years later, the Smithsonian said they found the coffins, but they were stored in a warehouse that was contaminated by asbestos, so nobody could go in there to see them. During World War II, a crew was building an airship in Alaska. They excavated a mound that had gigantic human remains, skeletons twice or 3 times the size of a normal human. This report has been confirmed by multiple sources. The Smithsonian collected the findings, and that was the last anyone heard about it. There are stories like this from Alaska all the way down to Mexico City. An amazing discovery is made, the Smithsonian steps in, the story disappears. The saying, "skeletons in your closet," means you have secrets you don't want revealed. Secrets that, if discovered, would be embarrassing and possibly dangerous. In the case of the Smithsonian, skeletons in the closet could be taken literally. But the government literally has evidence that an advanced race was in North America long before the native tribes arrived. Evidence they don't want revealed. Mainstream science says this is nonsense. But the Hopi and other Grand Canyon tribes do believe this. The Hopi say that when the first people emerged from the Grand Canyon, they sent a message to the Temple of the Sun asking for a blessing of peace. That messenger hasn't returned. But even today in Hopi villages, at sundown, tribal elders can be seen on rooftops, gazing toward the setting sun, waiting for the messenger to come home. And when he does, the ancient land will be returned to the first people. Now that's an optimistic belief. The United States spent 200 years taking land from the first people. You really think they're going to give it back?
3 + 1 5 + 0 0.
Okay, I admit that the story does sound far-fetched, but it is true that there is a no-fly zone over that part of the Grand Canyon, and even in the public areas, you can't fly beneath the rim of the canyon. But when people go searching for the cave, unmarked planes show up almost immediately in the no-fly zone below the rim.
Below the rim.
Don't be an infant. Next up is the Hollow Earth theory and the story of Agartha. Agartha is a hidden city inside the Earth. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but they ended up there after losing a war with Atlantis. This is a good one. Cultures around the world have myths that speak of a mysterious underground kingdom that exists deep within the earth, hidden away from the primitive and violent surface dwellers, which is us. Picture a society untouched by time, unscathed by war, and unaffected by natural disasters. A culture thriving in the vast open spaces inside the earth. Throughout history, many have looked for physical evidence of its existence, tempted by stories of a peaceful but powerful subterranean civilization with advanced technology and ancient knowledge long forgotten by modern man. This is the story of the underground kingdom of Agartha, and the explorers who've said that not only is it a real place, but they know where it is. stories of a hollow earth have existed in cultures for thousands of years. Nearly every ancient society has stories about an underground realm, often inhabited by superior beings. Buddhists firmly believe in the subterranean kingdom of Agartha, ruled by the mysterious King of the World.
Ooh, Leonardo DiCaprio?
No.
Ah.
Agartha is said to be home to millions and connected to the surface by a vast tunnel network within the planet's crust. Indian religions speak of a place called Patala, which translates to that which is below the feet. Patala is described as a beautiful land full of rolling green hills and crystal clear lakes. Agartha is described the same way. Some believe this is the real Garden of Eden, that when God cast Adam and Eve out of the garden, he actually sent them to the surface. In an ancient Mayan text called the Popol Vuh, there is the story of Xibalba, an underworld civilization. And from Xibalba, twin brothers emerge, and like Adam and Eve, they became the first people above ground. Chicomazdalk is the place where the Aztecs emerged to live on the surface of the earth. It translates to 7 caves, and researchers are actually looking for it, and some think they found it. African and other Native American legends also mention subterranean realms and cavern spirits. The most consistent story is that of an advanced inner Earth civilization isolated from surface humanity. The Sumerians knew it as Kur, a void space or home of the dead. The Babylonians called it Urkala, another world ruled by gods. The Chinese call this underworld Diyu, and the Japanese call it Yomi. Ancient Egypt, Islam, Greek, Rome, even Celtic Irish. They all have myths of an underground world. More modern myths may call this place hell, but it could be argued that hell is a relatively new concept, that it's a construct designed to create fear and inspire good behavior. But before the concept of hell, the underworld was inhabited by advanced, godlike people who came to the surface of the earth. Once on the surface, they either created humanity or taught civilization to primitive humans. It's easy enough to interpret those as the same thing. And like the flood myth, which is present in every ancient culture, the inner earth story also appears over and over again. Recent discoveries are starting to point to the fact that a great flood did really happen. So when cultures from all over the world share the same myth, we have to start looking at all those myths as maybe more than just a story. Those myths may be referring to actual history. But to prove the existence of Agartha, an underground civilization, and the Hollow Earth, we'll need more than stories. We need scientific evidence and eyewitness testimony. Fortunately, we have both. The Hollow Earth theory proposes that our planet is not a solid sphere, but a hollow one, with vast unexplored spaces within. In 1692, astronomer Edmund Halley proposed a hollow Earth consisting of a shell about 500 miles thick. Within that shell are 2 concentric spheres and a central core about the diameter of Venus. Halley said the spaces in between the shells could support life, with light provided by a luminous atmosphere. In the late 18th century, mathematician Leonard Euler used physics calculations to hypothesize a hollow Earth with a central sun. Euler's calculations suggested that gravity would propel matter equally in all directions, forming spheres with hollow interiors.
Wait. How can the Earth be hollow and flat at the same time?
Well, the Earth isn't flat.
Planes always fly in a straight line. If the Earth was round, they would have to adjust for that.
Yeah, that's not how that works.
Yeah, speaking of planes, if the Earth was a spinning ball, you'd be able to fly a helicopter straight up in the air, wait for the ball to spin, and then land on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, the atmosphere spins too.
The air.
Yeah.
Right. How fast does the Earth spin?
Well, that depends on the latitude.
How fast?
Between 300 and 1,000 miles an hour.
Okay, so empty air sticks to the ground, moving at 1,000 miles an hour.
Yep.
In perfect sync, everywhere on a big round ball.
Yes.
Agree to disagree.
But what does modern science have to say about the hollow Earth? On the surface, the hollow Earth theory seems to defy basic geological understanding. Seismic data and the study of Earth's gravitational field suggest that our planet is composed of several layers: the crust, the mantle, and the core. However, proponents of the hollow Earth theory argue that the data are open to interpretation. They point to anomalies in seismic readings, which they claim could be indicative of large empty spaces within the Earth. They also cite the existence of vast underground caves as evidence of the Earth's hollowness. And if the Earth is hollow, it could support the large population of Agartha. Even if the Earth isn't completely hollow, if there are vast hollow areas within the Earth, why couldn't they house a hidden civilization? Some trace the story of Agartha back to ancient Buddhist texts, where it's described as a paradise, a place of pure harmony and advanced knowledge. In the Western world, what we know about Agartha mostly comes from Alexandre Centeve Delvedre. He was a French intellectual and occultist. He spoke of Agartha as a secret civilization, its people possessing wisdom and technology far beyond our understanding. Centeve learned of Agartha through his Sanskrit teacher, who insisted it was a real geographic place. Centeve's descriptions of Agartha were vivid and detailed. He spoke of grand palaces illuminated by magical light and of advanced technologies that harnessed the Earth's magnetic field. In the 19th century, Agarthans already had citywide lighting, railways, and even air travel. Centeves believed that the Agarthans were the guardians of sacred knowledge, a knowledge that can bring about a golden age of peace and enlightenment on the surface world. Others would continue the search for Agartha. Occultist Elena Blavatsky searched for evidence of a hollow Earth and the secret tunnels that Agarthans used to travel all over the planet. But as far as we know, Centeve and Madame Blavatsky didn't find Agartha. But not because it doesn't exist, because they didn't know where to look. But we do. The reason Edmund Halley started exploring the idea that the Earth was hollow was because of strange compass readings in the Atlantic. He believed that the aurora borealis resulted from gases escaping from the inner spheres inside the Earth. This suggested there were entrances at the North and South Pole, and once inside, you can navigate the inner shells through vast cave and tunnel systems. The hollow Earth theory fell out of favor for a while but gained new life in 1818. American John Sims launched the notorious Sims hole theory. He declared that the Earth was hollow and habitable. He said the inner Earth is comprised of 4 nested shells with openings at the poles. And Sims dedicated much of his life to promoting this theory by trying to put together a polar expedition, though that never happened. In 1829, Norwegian fisherman Olaf Jansen claimed that he and his father sailed through a polar opening and into the planet's interior. There they spent 2 years among a race of giants before exiting through the South Pole. His story is documented in the book The Smoky God by Willis George Emerson, which is a fun read. But probably the most famous and detailed account of the world inside the Earth comes from Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Admiral Byrd was an aviation pioneer, polar explorer, and one of the most decorated and celebrated officers in the history of the American military, so a serious guy. Byrd took his plane out on a quick survey mission of the North Pole. As he was flying over ice and snow, he noticed the sunlight changed. Then it got warmer. A few minutes later, he was flying over fields of green grass and forests and rivers. He even saw a woolly mammoth grazing in one of those fields. Then he no longer had control of his plane, and suddenly 2 craft came up beside him.
Off our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft. They are closing rapidly alongside. They are disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They are close enough now to see the markings on them. It is a type of swastika. This is fantastic. Where are we? What has happened? I tug at the controls again. They will not respond. We are caught in an invisible vice grip of some type.
Admiral Byrd lands and is escorted by tall, blonde men to an underground city. There, the Admiral meets someone called the Master. Now, I linked to an episode where I go into a lot of detail about what Admiral Byrd found, so check that out if you want to learn more. I'll try not to spoil too much here. So Admiral Byrd found a way to the hollow Earth in the North Pole. Others have found their way in through the South Pole. The South Pole is often connected to Nazi Germany. Hitler was an occultist and was famously fascinated by the possibility that the hollow Earth could be accessed through Antarctica. Germany did make an expedition to Antarctica in 1938. I theorized in the Operation High Jump episode that this was the reason the United States sent such a large, well-armed task force down there in 1946. The Germans had maps of the area, including a cave system underneath the surface. They even had step-by-step directions on how to get into the hollow Earth. The directions are very specific. Distances right down to the meter. After you follow the first 8 steps, the 9th step is interesting.
Proceed to Agartha, full speed. Process straight ahead until the new light can be seen. Change of magnetic poles, the changes of the compass needle and instruments are to be disregarded.
German U-boat 209, commanded by Heinrich Broda, said he reached the interior of the Earth and found a vast network of tunnels. There are rumors that, after Germany surrendered, some Nazis fled to Antarctica and hid in these tunnels. And other rumors say they're still there. But the poles aren't the only way to get into the cave system that leads to Agartha. There are entrances all over the world, and chances are, there's one near you. The planetary grid system is a network of energy lines crisscrossing the planet. These lines are said to influence everything from ancient monument placement to the patterns of animal migration. The idea of a planetary grid goes back to the ancient Greeks, who believed in a concept called Amphelos, the Earth's central point. And you can see this concept expressed in places like the Oracle at Delphi, said to be the center of the ancient world. A few centuries later, in the 1920s, Alfred Watkins noticed that ancient sites seemed to line up along straight paths. He termed these ley lines, and while some considered his theory a coincidence, others saw a pattern connected to the Earth's geography. More recently, the unified vector geometry theory was proposed by Buckminster Fuller and later developed by scientists like William Becker and Beth Higgins. According to this theory, the Earth is covered by an invisible grid formed by 120 identical triangles. This grid supposedly aligns with significant geographical and historical points across the globe. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. According to the unified vector geometry theory, it isn't randomly placed, but occupies a crucial point on this global energy grid. The same applies to other ancient landmarks like Stonehenge and Machu Picchu, the Nazca Lines, and even the Bermuda Triangle. In addition to the North and South Poles, entrances to the Kingdom of Agartha are also found on some of these planetary grid points. Let's take a quick trip around the world and look for a way in. The first way into the Hollow Earth is in the caves of Diros in Greece. This entrance is closely connected to Plato and the story of Atlantis. From Greece across the Mediterranean to Mount Epimeo in Italy, for centuries, this has been called a portal to the inner Earth. Now going south across the Mediterranean is the Pyramid of Giza. Giza doesn't seem like it would have access to the Hollow Earth, but we now know that underneath the pyramids is a vast cave system, underground rivers, reservoirs, and tunnels. With modern technology like ground-penetrating radar, new caverns and chambers are discovered all the time. Another entrance to the Earth is said to be within King Solomon's mines. Solomon, a king of Israel and son of King David, was known for his wisdom, power, and his personal fortune, described as one of the largest on Earth. King Solomon's mines became known to the world because of the famous novel featuring the character Allan Quatermain, an adventurer you might remember from the movie The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Quatermain was played by Sean Connery.
Underrated movie.
Yeah, I think so too. Wealth is usually associated with gold, but King Solomon's wealth is thought to have come from the mining of copper, and these mines would have been operating around the 13th century BC. Now, even though the legend of King Solomon's mines comes from a fictional novel, treasure hunters believe this is a real place and have been searching for it for a long time. In 2008, there might have been a breakthrough. An ancient mining city was discovered in Khirbat el Nahas in Jordan. There, archaeologists discovered a copper mine and a copper smelting camp, which seemed to be operational in the 13th century BC. The team also found a lot of personal items, including clothing, ceramics, fabric, even tools, all indicating a highly developed, long-term settlement at the site. And these objects have been dated to the same period as King Solomon's mines. The next entrance is said to be in Rama, India, where an ancient subterranean city was recently discovered. Tibet is home to many stories about Hollow Earth, so it's not surprising that there are entrances underneath the Himalayas. One of these is in the underground city of Shonshe, which, according to legend, has been guarded by monks for thousands of years. But there are entrances to the inner Earth in the west too. Iguazu in Argentina allegedly has an entrance hidden somewhere underneath the famous waterfalls. Underneath Mato Grosso in Brazil is said to be the city of Posid, which was built by Atlanteans after the destruction of Atlantis. Even the United States has gateways to the Hollow Earth. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky has been known as an entrance since the first native tribes arrived there thousands of years ago. The most famous entrance to the Hollow Earth in the United States is probably Mount Shasta. It's here where the city of Telos is said to have been built and is still occupied. And there is a lot of evidence that something is happening there. I linked to an episode we did where we called Mount Shasta the most paranormal place on Earth, and it absolutely is. And these are just a few entrances to the Kingdom of Gartha in North America. There are others in Arkansas, California, and other states, and several locations in Canada. Even the site of the secret underground base in Dulce, New Mexico, was said to be chosen because of its proximity to an entrance to the inner Earth. And we did an episode on Dulce Base as well. And you might have noticed that a lot of alleged entrances to the Hollow Earth coincide with locations famous for UFO sightings. And this might not be a coincidence. Whenever someone mentions a UFO, our instinct is to look up toward the sky, to space. Turns out, we might be looking in the wrong direction. When we think of UFOs, we think of extraterrestrials from a distant star. And that could be true. But there's also the theory that UFOs aren't coming from a different planet, but from inside our planet. Scientifically speaking, it makes more sense that there's a race of humanoid beings living within the Earth, as opposed to a race of humanoid beings who have somehow figured out how to cross the vast distances of space. And isn't it strange that the aliens we talk about are all humanoid? Whether they're the small grays, the tall whites, or even the goblin-type aliens, they all kind of look like us. 2 eyes, nose, mouth, 2 legs with feet and toes, 2 arms with hands and fingers. Even the size of the beings is close to the size of humans. Now, maybe all intelligent life in the universe evolves this way, but I would expect life in different biomes, in different ecosystems, on different planets, light years away, to look radically different than humans. But they don't. So it's possible that they're from here, just in places we can't normally see. We see a lot of UFOs coming out of the ocean, but we haven't found any type of base, at least not a confirmed sighting. So what if the base is inside the Hollow Earth, under the ocean? I can think of no better hiding place.
Far side of the moon.
Yeah, that would be a good hiding place. And there are crazy things happening on the far side of the moon, and an episode on that is coming up. There have been many UFO sightings around Mount Shasta where the object flies into the mountain and then disappears. Now, assuming the witnesses are telling the truth, and I believe they are, the objects are going somewhere. In the Arctic near the North Pole, the earliest reported UFO sightings go back to the year 1850. Captain DeHaven and his medical officer saw what they thought was a balloon, but then a second object appeared, and suddenly both objects vanished. Around midnight on January 22, 1952, a strange object was tracked on radar at a military outpost in northern Alaska. It was moving at 1,500 miles per hour, which no aircraft on Earth could do. 3 jets were sent to investigate, and as the jets approached, the radar blip slowed down and just hovered. A few seconds later, it streaked out of sight, heading to the North Pole, moving even faster than before. On October 5, 1960, the Ballistic Missile Early Warning Station at Thule, Greenland, thought World War III had started. Radar was tracking multiple objects moving at speeds too fast to be anything except a Soviet missile attack. Within minutes, US bases in England and Canada were mobilized, and NORAD and the Strategic Air Command were alerted. A few minutes later, the radar signals changed course and disappeared somewhere near the North Pole. The military has been dealing with Arctic UFOs since 1945. The first UFO in Alaska emerged from the sea in March of that year. 14 crew members on an Army transport ship witnessed the object. It approached the ship, circled it, and then flew away. And there were many more sightings in the Arctic during this time. Inuits in the Arctic regions have encountered UFOs in the past and included them in their myths. Once, a man from the Buckland River tribe discovered what appeared to be a UFO landing site. 2 strips of land approximately 2 feet wide had been burned all the way down to the ground. On Sledge Island, Inuits have a legend of a massive ball of fire resembling the moon that descended from the sky. Shortly after the object was spotted, a creature described as a human skeleton appeared in the village. According to the legend, this visitor was not friendly and killed most of the people it encountered. These are just a small fraction of the stories about UFOs and visitors coming from the ocean, from the poles, or the middle of the Earth. So we've covered the eyewitness accounts. The next piece of the Hollow Earth puzzle is scientific evidence. We have that too. The Kola Super Deep Borehole was just 9 inches in diameter, and at 40,230 feet, it's the deepest hole on Earth. It took almost 20 years to reach its depth of 7.5 miles.
Mel's hole is deeper than that.
Well, that's true, but that's another episode.
They pulled some crazy stuff out of Mel's hole.
Kola Super Deep was abandoned in 1992 when the drillers encountered higher than expected temperatures. Over 350 degrees Fahrenheit, the drill just couldn't handle the heat. 7.5 miles is a deep hole, but it's 4,000 miles to the Earth's core, so the Kola Super Deep is nothing. And since grade school, we've been taught that the Earth is made up of the crust, the mantle, and the core. And the core is 2 layers. The outer core is almost 1,400 miles thick and mostly made of liquid iron and nickel. The inner core is a solid sphere with a radius of about 750 miles. And the inner core is thought to be comprised mostly of iron and some nickel. But if we've only dug 7.5 miles down, how do we know for sure what's down there? Well, we don't. But by using different methods, scientists can take a guess. The primary way we've learned about the Earth's core is through the study of seismic waves. These are waves of energy that travel through the Earth's layers. They move at different speeds depending on the density and the composition of the layer they're passing through. Further evidence comes from the Earth's magnetic field, which is best explained by a dynamo effect. This is the spinning motion of the liquid iron and nickel which generates the field. But something strange happened at the beginning of this year. The Earth's inner core stopped spinning. Now, it's believed that the core started spinning again, but in a different direction. And nobody really knows what caused this. We can only guess. A few months later, it was determined that the Earth has an inner core of solid iron about 400 miles wide. So new discoveries are always being made, and everything we know about the inner Earth is just educated guesses. Why couldn't the Earth be hollow, or at least have enormous hollowed out spaces that could support life? Now, skeptics have argued that you can't have life inside the Earth. The main reason, there's no water. Well, when the Kola Super Deep Borehole was being drilled, fossilized plankton were found miles below the surface. Still, those are fossils, maybe millions of years old. What about now? Well, in 2014, scientists discovered water hundreds of miles below the Earth's surface. Not just a little water. They found so much water, you can fill all the Earth's oceans with it. 3 times.
Whoa.
Most of the Earth's water is not on the surface, it's inside. This water exists between 250 and 410 miles under the surface in an area called a transition zone, a buffer layer that separates the upper from the lower mantle. Now, if there's water down there, I wonder what else could be down there. Well, in 2019, geologists from Princeton University published a study that surprised everyone. They used supercomputers to analyze seismic data from some of the largest earthquakes ever recorded, including the 8.2 magnitude quake that hit Bolivia in 1994. Earthquakes that big reverberate through the entire planet. We may not feel them, but seismographs can detect them. Analysis showed that beneath the surface of the Earth are vast plains and mountains taller than the Himalayas, all deep within the Earth. How deep? 410 miles, the same depth as where the water is found, the transition zone. So what about the entrances at the poles? Well, pictures are hard to find, and they're allegedly all altered by NASA, which we know they do. But there are a few photos and videos out there of the poles that show something strange. These photos were taken by the ESSA-7 satellite in 1968. In one photograph, the North Pole was covered by clouds. In another photograph, the same area had no clouds, revealing a massive hole where the pole would be. This was taken from the ISS in March of 2015. NASA says that's a typhoon. Fair enough. But in 1987, the Russian space station Mir recorded something at the North Pole that is definitely not a typhoon. What is this? The Hollow Earth theory has been around for centuries. At one point in history, it was the mainstream scientific view. But is there really evidence to support the Hollow Earth theory? Well, yes and no. Modern Hollow Earth theory always starts with Edmund Halley. He's a famous astronomer, which gives the theory some legitimacy. Halley put forth the idea because he couldn't explain why magnetic poles were moving. He figured there were shells inside the Earth that moved independently of each other. And he was almost right. During Halley's time, it wasn't yet known that the Earth's core spins, which creates the magnetic field. But he was correct that sections of the inner Earth can move independently of each other, including the core, as we only recently discovered. Mathematician Leonard Euler gets credit for pushing the Hollow Earth theory in the 18th century. Now, I'm not sure how he became attached to the theory. There's no evidence he ever said anything about it. And the concept of Agartha as a legendary subterranean world was first mentioned in the late 19th century. French occultist and esoteric writer Alexandre Saint-Yves introduced the idea in a book he published in 1885. And according to his writing, Agartha was a place of ancient wisdom and spiritual enlightenment, but he never found actual hard evidence that it was a real place. He actually never looked. The idea caught on with other occultists and theosophists like Madame Blavatsky, but the only evidence they provide of the Hollow Earth comes from visions and telepathic communication, and I'll leave it to you to determine if that's proof enough. Most modern Hollow Earth myths come from the Jules Verne novel Journey to the Center of the Earth. When this story was published in 1864, it was a phenomenon and made Jules Verne one of the most famous authors in the world. Before there were blockbuster films, there was Jules Verne. Now, Admiral Byrd's diary describes how he flew into the Hollow Earth and had a meeting with an advanced race of beings who warned him about war and nuclear weapons. And this is a common theme in science fiction in the 1950s and 1960s. Admiral Byrd's story is basically the same plot as The Day the Earth Stood Still. It just takes place in Agartha. I covered Admiral Byrd's diary in the other episode. I also explain whether the diary is real or not. Spoiler alert, it's not. Now, the water found inside the Earth is real. And when the discovery was made, we were clickbaited into thinking there are these vast oceans inside the Earth. And there may be, but that's not what this discovery showed. There is a massive amount of water in the Earth's mantle, but it's trapped inside rocks and minerals.
Oi, rocks can hold water?
Yep, lots of it. It's a process called mineral hydration. It's a good way to lock water in a dry environment. For example, the surface of the moon is covered in water. The water is just embedded in the lunar soil. So the water inside the Earth is real, just not in a way that's obvious. And the mountains inside the Earth are also real, but also not how we might think. Again, we were clickbaited into thinking there are huge open spaces underground with mountain ranges, and you can't help but picture scenes from Godzilla vs. Kong. But that's not what they found. There are mountains of material that are denser than the material around them. It's still solid-ish material, just of different densities. The NASA video is a typhoon, and the video taken from Mir was a hoax, but you probably knew that. Now, it's true there aren't a lot of satellite pictures of the poles, and there is a lot of speculation about this. The truth is, there aren't a lot of satellites there. It's not worth taking a lot of photographs of the poles because not much changes, and photos that are almost pure white are hard to analyze. Now, there are a couple of satellites in polar orbit that measure how much the ice caps are melting.
They're not.
Well, a few years ago, you can maybe make that argument, but NASA reports that Antarctica is losing around 150 billion tons of ice per year.
Yeah, but when does NASA ever tell the truth, huh?
Now, that's a fair point. But just last week, it was reported that Antarctica is experiencing a 6 Sigma event, which happens every 7.5 million years.
Oh, this sounds bad.
Well, it ain't good, but assuming we're not all underwater, I'll get into that in a future episode. As for things I can explain, there are witness reports of UFOs flying into Mount Shasta. No video that I can find, but multiple witnesses have seen this, and I think they're probably telling the truth. UFOs are coming out of the ocean. We've all seen video of that. And if the aliens landed tomorrow and held a press conference where they said we're not from another planet, but we're from inside this planet, well, that would make sense to me. Scientifically speaking, that's more plausible than creating wormholes and bending space-time to travel through space. But until the aliens announce themselves, or until our government starts telling the truth, we're just not going to know for sure. And there are many, many interesting stories about the Hollow Earth, and there's no way to cover them in one episode, so keep an eye out for more on this topic. Now, it's true we can't prove the Earth is hollow. It's also true we can't prove it's not. If you follow this channel, you know I try to find as much truth in these mysteries as I can. But the real truth is, some mysteries just can't be solved. And those are my favorite.
3+15+00.
All right, I actually wasn't going to include this next video, but someone insisted on it.
It's too perfect. We gotta put this one in.
He's probably right. It's an entire episode about the war between Atlantis and Lemuria. Now, I wrote this episode because while researching Agartha, I came across this story of this ancient war, and I was fascinated by it. I'm also proud of the edit. See you in a minute. For thousands of years, the world has been captivated by the mystery of Atlantis. The concept of an ancient city hidden beneath the ocean is intriguing. But what if there was not just a city, but an entire continent buried beneath the waves? The continent of Lemuria is a huge landmass believed to have sunk in the Indian Ocean after some ancient catastrophic event. Atlantis and Lemuria are similar in that they've sparked numerous theories, legends, and interpretations. But Atlantis and Lemuria are very different in one way. There's no proof of Atlantis. In 1858, zoologist Philip Sclater made a name for himself in the scientific community. He divided the world into 6 geographic regions based on the distribution of animal species. They were Palearctic, Ethiopian, Indian, Australasian, Nearctic, and Neotropical. Sclater's system is still used today. While Sclater created his classification system, a mystery emerged: the fossils of lemurs. Lemur fossils were found in parts of South America, India, Africa, and Madagascar. These areas are not connected by land, but lemurs don't swim. The question haunted Sclater: how did lemurs spread across the world? Identical species don't develop in different places at once. He had a radical answer: that there was a landmass once connecting these areas. It would need to be massive, bigger than Australia. His theory was a stretch, but it would solve the mysteries he'd stumbled upon. Along with the unexplainable locations of lemurs, Sclater also uncovered extreme similarities between monkeys found in South America and Africa. In 1864, Sclater published an essay about his theory in a scientific journal. In the essay, he refers to his proposed continent as Lemuria.
Anterior to the existence of Africa in its present shape, a large continent occupied parts of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, stretching out towards what is now America to the west and to India on the east. In Madagascar and the Mascarene Islands, we have existing relics of this great continent, for which, as the original focus of the Stirps Lemurum, I should propose the name Lemuria.
This land bridge concept was popular in the scientific community at the time. Sir Charles Lyell, a well-known geologist and teacher, believed continents were rising above and sinking below the ocean routinely, just very gradually. So it's no surprise that following the publication of Philip Sclater's essay, the Lemuria theory really caught on. It turned out Lemuria may have been the answer to many scientific mysteries. In fact, Lemuria may have been the birthplace of humanity itself. In 1864, Philip Sclater introduced the concept of Lemuria to the world. 24 years later, Helena Blavatsky, a Russian theosophist and co-founder of the Theosophical Society, published a book titled The Secret Doctrine. Theosophists, like Blavatsky, are truth seekers who study a combination of religion, science, and philosophy. They believe in an ancient wisdom that unites all major religions. The Secret Doctrine discusses the origins of humanity. It outlines a sequence of 7 root races representing different stages of human development. Currently, we are in the 5th stage, with the 6th and 7th yet to come. According to the Secret Doctrine and other writings by Blavatsky's followers, the first root race was ethereal and didn't possess physical bodies. They may have appeared as giant phantoms. The second root race was shapeless and asexual.
Asexual?
Well, they didn't engage in sexual activity.
Sounds like they were married.
They reproduced through a process called budding, which is essentially natural cloning. The third root race thrived in Lemuria and coexisted with dinosaurs. According to Theosophist W. Scott Elliott, these Lemurians were giants.
His stature was gigantic, somewhere between 12 and 15 feet. His skin was of a yellowish-brown color. He had a strangely flattened face, eyes small but piercing, and set curiously far apart, so that he could see sideways as well as in front. The head sloped backwards and upwards in a rather curious way. The arms and legs, especially the former, were longer in proportion than ours.
Early in the Lemurian period, these supposed human ancestors laid eggs, but over millions of years, their reproductive process developed into, well, the one that we know today.
Yeah, that process has gotten me in a lot of trouble over the years.
Well, maybe you shouldn't have engaged in the process as much as you did.
Yeah, what can I tell you? The ladies love me.
But Blavatsky and her followers weren't the only people who wrote about the Lemurians. A few years later, British writer James Churchward started writing about the sunken continent of Mu. At first, Mu was thought to be the inspiration for Plato's story of Atlantis, but Churchward connected it to Lemuria, and now many consider these lost continents one and the same. James Churchward's work is based on the translations of ancient Indian tablets. These texts are included in a series of books called The Children of Mu. The tablets describe an ancient civilization of 60 million people that was eventually destroyed. According to Churchward and others like archaeologist Augustus Le Plongeon, the sunken continent of Mu once stretched from Hawaii in the north to Easter Island in the east and almost reached Japan in the west. The Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan is believed to be the underwater ruins of this lost civilization. Nan Madol in Micronesia is considered the southern part of Mu. The site contains structures made of large volcanic rock logs. It's unknown who built them or how, but the society was advanced. Recent LiDAR imaging revealed an artificial irrigation system that provided fresh water to residents throughout the area. They even had a sewer system, years before the ancient Greeks or other advanced civilizations. Easter Island marks the eastern point of Mu. Take a look at Easter Island. It's a small island in the middle of nowhere. Yet it was once home to 12,000 people. How did they get there? Mainstream science says they traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean in canoes. But if the continent of Mu existed, they could have just walked there. This could also explain the similarities between Polynesian languages and Greek, as well as the worship of a sun god named Ra on Easter Island, which is similar to the Egyptian sun god Ra. These similarities of language and religion suggest that these cultures either intermingled or originated from a common source. James Churchward, Le Plongeon, Helena Blavatsky, they all describe Lemuria and Mu differently. But there's one thing they all agree on. It was destroyed in a terrible cataclysm. Chan Thomas, in his book The Adam and Eve Story, presents compelling evidence that global disasters occur in a cycle. Lemuria might have been destroyed during one of these events. According to James Bramwell and William Scott Elliott, supporters of this theory, Lemuria was destroyed 11,500 years ago in a global disaster. And evidence of a global cataclysm can be found all over the earth, from the pyramids of Giza, across Africa, and even on Easter Island. Now, of course, I'm referring to the Great Flood mentioned in the myths of every culture on Earth. The flood that occurred during a period of history called the Younger Dryas. As the last ice age drew to a close, the massive ice sheets that had covered much of the northern hemisphere began to rapidly melt away. Great torrents of fresh water poured into the oceans, causing sea levels to rise dramatically across the globe.
Hey, maybe instead of the Younger Dryas, it should be called the Younger Wet Ass. What?
Coastal areas were transformed by the flood as shorelines expanded inland by hundreds of miles. Entire land masses were submerged beneath the rising seas. The lives of every human on Earth were disrupted by the Great Flood. Entire cultures that had been tied to the old shorelines were shattered and scattered. But a few resourceful people survived and rebuilt their civilization. But this time they did it in secret and hidden far away from any future global catastrophe. But what caused the ice sheets to melt in the first place? There's disagreement about this. Some think it was the impact of a massive comet or asteroid. Others think it was a solar event so destructive that plasma from the sun stripped away the Earth's magnetic field, exposing the planet to extreme heat and radiation. Or a pole shift, which would also create a worldwide disaster. But there is one legend of Lemuria that contains a different explanation. That the Great Flood wasn't caused by an asteroid or the sun. It's said that the Great Flood was caused by people. According to Blavatsky, Lemuria was destroyed by fire. Volcanic eruptions shattered the continent into islands. Slowly, the islands sank into the sea, along with Lemurian history. James Churchward's version of the sinking of Mu is more dramatic and immediate. The civilization was obliterated in a single night of terror. Intense earthquakes shook the land. Volcanic eruptions spewed fire and ash. Relentless tsunamis engulfed the entire continent. It was a catastrophic event. In one night, everything was gone. There are even speculations that the Lemurians were eradicated by a pole shift, a sudden and civilization-ending event. Churchward's depiction resembles this cataclysmic shift. Volcanoes erupting around the world simultaneously, massive waves flooding everything, an entire civilization wiped away in an afternoon. Others propose something even more chilling. The destruction of Lemuria was not natural at all. They believe it was intentional. There is a 10,000-year-old story, which appears in books like the Chronicles of Akakor, which says the lost continents of Lemuria and Atlantis sank due to a nuclear war caused by the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are deities of the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. And some consider the Anunnaki an alien race who created humans through DNA manipulation, then used humans as slaves.
Facts.
A full Anunnaki episode is coming up.
Oh, how you tease.
The Chronicles of Akakor tells the story of two hostile divine races that eventually went to war.
The four corners of the earth were red. The two races of gods started to dispute.
In J.J. Benitez's book, The Visitors, he recounts the alien abduction of a scientist, Daniel W. Fry, on July 4th, 1959. While Fry was on the alien vessel, they told him that they were the descendants of a race who lived on the land of Mu. They said there was another advanced civilization on Earth that we call the Atlanteans. Edgar Cayce also received telepathic messages about Atlantis. He described their culture and their technology.
In our great city, we harnessed the Firestone's energy through advanced mechanics. Our domed power station concentrated the stone's rays via prisms. This energy propelled our crafts through induction, similar to your remote radio control. Though invisible, the rays powered vehicles through the air on land and sea. Carefully aligned, the stone's forces regenerated human bodies and fueled industries.
Cayce also predicted that Atlantis would eventually be discovered.
The position as the continent Atlantis occupied is that as between the Gulf of Mexico on the one hand and the Mediterranean upon the other. Evidences of this lost civilization are to be found in the Pyrenees and Morocco on the one hand, British Honduras, Yucatan, and America upon the other, the British West Indies or the Bahamas, and a portion of same that may be seen in the present, if the geological survey would be made in some of these, especially or notably in Bimini and in the Gulf Stream through this vicinity. These may be even yet determined.
Now keep in mind that it was 1939 when Edgar Cayce predicted that Atlanta would be discovered in Bimini in the Bahamas. The Bimini Road wasn't discovered until 1968. According to Cayce and others, Atlanteans lived peacefully on Earth for over 200,000 years. But then the Anunnaki started to influence and corrupt the leaders of Atlantis. The corrupted Atlanteans, known as the Sons of Belial, initiated a conflict with Lemuria. About 25,000 years ago, Atlantis and Lemuria disagreed on how to rule the Earth. Atlantis wanted to dominate all tribes and civilizations worldwide. But the Lemurians wanted the Earth's civilizations to develop on their own, so they ordered Atlantis to leave them alone. Atlantis refused. Lemuria insisted. Atlantis chose war. The beginning of the war was the year 10,468 BC. In his writing, Plato mentions 9,500 BC as the year that Atlantis was destroyed. An ancient historian named Hemus reports a terrible catastrophe that occurred in 11,000 BC. But how were these civilizations destroyed? Well, the Atlanteans had extremely advanced technology and weapons.
Their technologies and weapons were beyond what we know today. Flying crafts powered by fire crystals traversed the skies. Great energy beams harvested from the Earth itself fueled weapons that could level mountains.
Lemuria was not as well armed and could not avoid war.
They burned the world with solar heat and tried to draw energy from each other. Rivers have been changed, and the height of the mountains and the strength of the sun have changed. There have been continents that have been flooded.
In the end, more than 60 million Lemurians died. The survivors took refuge in Agartha and later attacked Atlantis. The Earth became unstable as a result of nuclear explosions, and because of that, the Earth's axis changed and the poles shifted. All that remained of Atlantis are ancient structures like Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids. The civilization of Atlantis did not survive the conflict, but about 10,000 Lemurians did survive, and they rebuilt their civilization. But this time they did it in secret. And that civilization exists today, thriving, under a mountain in California. Mount Shasta in Northern California has become synonymous with the unknown. Many who venture close to the mountain report strange events, glowing orbs, unexplained voices, and a tangible sense of another presence. Mount Shasta is also considered a vortex, a place where the boundary between dimensions is thin. Native American tribes speak of its sacred power, a spot where the spirit world is accessible. Then there are the geological mysteries. Why does Shasta have such a complex structure and so many different kinds of rock? Why do some plants grow there that are found nowhere else? Where did those plants come from? Well, legend has it that some Lemurians survived the cataclysm. The survivors traveled to North America and brought with them plants and animals and technology. They then built a city underneath Mount Shasta. They called this city Telos, the City of Light, and eyewitnesses have described the city in detail.
As you approach the hidden entrance to Telos, an energy pulsates through the ground. There is a deep humming sound and a vibration that you can feel all over your body.
Once inside, you are enveloped by a soft light that emanates from the walls of the city. Telos is carved into 5 expansive levels, each one a labyrinth of corridors, chambers, and gardens.
The inhabitants of Telos are 7 feet tall and draped in flowing white robes. Despite their large size, they move slowly and gracefully. They are the Lemurians, the guardians of their ancient, lost civilization. Their technology is integrated with their natural surroundings, just as it did in Lemuria before the fall.
In Telos, they use crystal technology. Large crystalline structures serve various functions. They have healing chambers that resonate with frequencies that restore the body and the soul. They have crystal communication devices that allow mental connection across the entire planet.
Transportation within the city is achieved through levitating platforms that glide along magnetic lines, guided by thought alone.
At the center of Telos is the Temple of the Heart. Here, a large crystal pulses with a heartbeat, a rhythm synchronized with the natural resonance of the earth.
Residents of Mount Shasta claim to have seen tall beings wearing white robes walking at the foot of the mountain. Hikers have even followed the beings into caves, but when the hikers finally get inside the cave, it's empty, though some say you can still hear and feel the humming vibration. One eyewitness actually made the news in the early 20th century. In 1904, J.C. Brown, a British prospector, was hired by a mining company to search for gold deposits in Northern California. While investigating around Mount Shasta, he noticed an odd-looking piece of rock that didn't match the surrounding area. As he began clearing the debris and vegetation surrounding the rock, he found an entrance to a cavern system that led deep into Mount Shasta. Brown walked about 3 miles into the interior of the mountain through an array of crisscrossing tunnel systems when he began stumbling across pieces of gold. After the 11th mile, he reached a location that resembled a village. Inside the village, he came across chambers filled with gold and copper tablets. He found statues and spears and weapons, and he found skeletons. The average heights of these skeletons were around 6 foot 6 inches tall, and the tallest being 10 feet in height. Over the next few days, he took pages and pages of notes. He memorized everything that he could, and when he left, he covered the entrance so that no one else would find it. And Brown spent the next 30 years researching and trying to build a group of experts to embark on an expedition. He finally gained a following of about 80 people willing to join the expedition, including a museum curator and several scientists. He spent 6 weeks planning out the entire trip, and several individuals sold off their properties believing that they would soon become rich. Brown was worried someone would sneak into the city in advance, so he withheld a lot of the specifics regarding the location of the cavern system. He met with the team one last time to make final preparations and establish the time and place of departure, June 19th at 1 p.m. The day finally arrived, and J.C. Brown didn't show, and he was never heard from again. But the story of Lemuria is not only told in the West. The Tamil people indigenous to South India have a story of a lost continent that dates back to ancient times. The name Kumari Kandam was applied to this sunken land. The legend tells of an early Tamil dynasty known as the Pandyan kings. They ruled over the now submerged Kumari Kandam continent before it was swallowed by the rising seas at the end of the last ice age.
Younger wet ass.
Dry ass.
Whatever.
According to the stories, Kumari Kandam was once located in the Indian Ocean between India and Madagascar. This large continent was the cradle of civilization, home to the first people. The Pandyan kings ruled the entire continent from their capital city before successive floods submerged Kumari Kandam around 10,000 years ago. Is this just a Tamil legend, or is this actual history? Well, floods at the end of the last ice age, we have proof of that. But a lost continent in the Indian Ocean between Madagascar and India? That's so specific. There's no way there's proof of that, is there?
Is there? Is there?
There is. Imagine an ancient tropical land. Lush jungles stretch as far as the eye can see. Dinosaurs graze on treetops high above the forest floor, while early mammals stalk the dark ground below. This was Mauritia, a lost world forgotten beneath the waves. In 2013, scientists announced that they may have found traces of this vanished continent deep under the Indian Ocean. It had sunk below the sea millions of years ago when the continents were still joined as one supercontinent. Back then, South America and Africa hadn't split apart. India was attached to Madagascar, and Mauritia was squeezed in between. Mauritia was discovered by accident. Geologists studying rocks on the island of Mauritius, east of Madagascar, were confused. They found minerals too ancient to belong to such a young volcanic island. As they followed the clues, they found traces of a much older landmass. A huge mass of buried continental crust stretched across the Indian Ocean, a lost continent matching ancient minerals. The researchers named it Mauritia after the island that led to its discovery. But the location of Mauritia is exactly where some legends say Lemuria was. The details of the continent are still a mystery, with more questions than answers. Was it really an intact continent, or just a jumbled mass of islands? And what creatures might have lived on this island? And could some of those creatures have been the very early ancestors of the Lemurians? There is no hard evidence to support the existence of Lemuria or Atlantis. Everything we know about these civilizations comes from stories. And many of those stories come from unreliable sources like Madame Blavatsky, James Churchward, and Edgar Cayce. Daniel Fry, who claimed to have been abducted by aliens, probably wasn't. He failed a polygraph, he kept changing his story, and he lied about his scientific credentials. He also got caught hoaxing UFO photographs. So without evidence, places like Lemuria, the Land of Mu, and Atlantis remain nothing but myths. But the accidental discovery of Mauritia shows that some ancient legends may be based in truth. The discovery of the continent of Mauritia happened completely by accident. Bimini Road was discovered by accident. So was the Yanaguni Monument. The city of Dwarka is described in ancient Indian texts as a magnificent city that was a symbol of prosperity. It was described as an advanced, well-planned city with beautiful gardens and temples and palaces. But according to Hindu legend, thousands of years ago, the seas began to rise, and eventually Dwarka disappeared into the ocean and was lost forever. And for 1,000 years, the story of the city of Dwarka was thought to be symbolic. But in the 1980s, the ancient city was found and is estimated to be around 10,000 years old, maybe older. In 2001, an underwater discovery was made off the coast of Cuba. Structures were found that at first were thought to be natural formations, but a submersible robot was sent to the site and found what's been described as an entire city. And what makes this find so extraordinary is that it's about 2,000 feet down. Scientists have said it could take 50,000 years for a city to sink that far. Now, even if it's not that old, there are blocks down there that are thought to be at least 6,000 years old, but nobody can say for sure. All of these discoveries were made by accident, and as long as people keep exploring the sea, there's a chance that Atlantis and Lemuria might eventually be found. And if we actually excavate the sites off India and Japan in the east, and Cuba and the Bahamas in the west, we may realize that Atlantis and Lemuria have already been found.
3+15+00.
Next up is a video about OOO parts, or out-of-place artifacts. But a better description is out-of-time artifacts. These are ancient objects discovered that are way too advanced for their time. Now, there are lots of these objects, and I only cover the major ones in this episode. But even if you've heard of these objects, if this episode is new for you, I promise you're going to learn something new. The story of the human race is a story of technology. One of our ancestors created fire and passed that knowledge along to the next generation. Then the invention of the wheel, then agriculture, a writing system, mathematics, space travel. Within our story, empires rise and fall, and technology progresses. Civilizations are born and die, and the human race continues to innovate. All of our innovations are built on previous ones. There could be no aqueduct without the arch. There could be no metal plow until someone learned how to mine iron. There could be no light bulb, no smartphone, and no computer without first understanding electricity. Our progress is linear, it's orderly. But sometimes an object is discovered that's completely out of place and out of time. A computer found on a sunken Roman ship. A power plant found in a 100,000-year-old cave. And evidence of a nuclear reactor from over 1 billion years ago. These objects shouldn't exist, but they do. Their existence violates the natural order of human progress. So if humans didn't create these items, who did? In 1962, an article was published about an archaeological expedition that explored the Bayan Har Mountains of Tibet in 1937. The team, led by archaeologist Chipu Te, discovered 716 granite discs engraved with characters that looked like hieroglyphics. Each disc was 9 inches in diameter and 1 inch thick, with a perfect 1-inch hole in the center. The stones were dated to more than 12,000 years ago, but they weren't the strangest thing found at the site. Not even close. The team discovered advanced star maps and the remains of unusual humanoids. The beings were small, with thin bodies and large heads.
Aliens!
Well, it took more than 20 years of trying, but the markings on the discs were finally translated. The discs told the story of a vessel that traveled to Earth from outer space. The inscriptions described a crash in the mountains of Tibet and what happened to the survivors of the crash.
I knew it!
The writing also gave the beings a name. They were called the Dropa.
The Dropa came down from the clouds in their aircraft. Our men, women, and children hid in the caves 10 times before sunrise. When at last we understood the sign language of the Dropa, we realized that the newcomers had peaceful intentions.
These findings were published in 1962 by Professor Sum Nui, but as could be expected, his peers didn't take it seriously. The story and the stones resurfaced 6 years later, but this time in Russia. Scientists discovered the granite used to make the stones contained extremely high amounts of cobalt and other heavy metals. These properties would have made the stones very hard to carve with primitive tools 12,000 years ago. The stones were tested with an oscillograph, a device used to read current and voltage. The results indicated the stones had once been electrically charged, or might have been electrical conductors. After these new discoveries, the stones disappeared again, until they turned up in the Banpo Museum in China. In 1974, Austrian engineer Ernst Wegner went to the museum to see the stones. Although the museum wouldn't give him any information about them, he was allowed to take photographs of the stones. That same year, a book was published called Sun Gods in Exile by David Agamon, and that book would prove everything. Sun Gods in Exile tells the story of Oxford professor Carl Robin Evans and his 1947 expedition into the Bayan Har Mountains. There he encountered living Dropa, where he learned their language and learned their history from their religious leader, Lurgan La. Lurgan La told him the Dropa came from a planet in the Sirius system, and they had come to Earth on an exploratory mission 12,000 years ago. Their ship crash-landed in the Himalayas and stranded the Dropa on Earth forever. The book was based on the journal of Dr. Carl Robin Evans, and that journal had pictures. This is Hui Pa La and Viz La, the rulers of the Dropa in 1947. The journal describes the Dropa as a small race, averaging 4'2" in height and only 60 pounds. They have large heads with large blue eyes. In 1994, German scientist Hartwig Hausdorff went to the Banpo Museum in China and asked to see the stones for himself. Well, he was told the stones were destroyed on official orders. When Hausdorff tried to look further into the Dropa tribe and their stones, the Chinese government said they had no record of any stones or a tribe known as the Dropa. As far as the Chinese government was concerned, the Dropa never existed. In the year 1900, off the coast of a small Greek island, a group of men were diving for sponges. During one dive at a depth of around 150 feet, they found something very unexpected, an ancient Roman shipwreck. The ship was full of ancient Greek artifacts dating back over 2,000 years. Coins, pottery, statues, and many other items were brought back to the surface. Among the wreckage was a heavily weathered block made of wood and calcified bronze. The block was taken to the museum with the rest of the artifacts, but it didn't really look like anything, so it was mostly ignored. But 2 years later, archaeologist Valerio Stace took a closer look at the unassuming block. It didn't take long for him to discover there was a lot more to the block than people realized. He could make out the shape of a large gear embedded in the calcified stone. He believed it was some sort of ancient astronomical clock. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed the idea as prochronistic, meaning too advanced for the time period or the wreckage. The ship was underwater for 2,000 years. The type of technology needed to build an astronomical clock just didn't exist yet. In fact, gears of this quality wouldn't be invented until the 14th century, about 1,700 years later. Mainstream scientists said the object must have found its way onto the ship at a much later time, and therefore wasn't all that special or important. So the object was placed on a shelf in a dark back room of a museum, and that's where it stayed, completely ignored for 50 years. But in 1951, Yale professor Derek J. DeSola Price was researching ancient clocks. He heard about a mysterious object discovered off the coast of a small Greek island called Antikythera. Price looked into the artifact, but his findings didn't impress his colleagues. But he would continue researching the device for the next 23 years. Then in 1974, with the help of a nuclear physicist, Price used X-ray and gamma-ray imaging to examine 82 pieces of the rock. This imaging revealed an assortment of bronze gears of various sizes, all connected to a central crank. As the gears spun, they would move hands on the object's face, like the hands of a clock. But this device wasn't designed to tell you what time it was. It was designed to do much, much more.
Nothing like this instrument is preserved elsewhere. Nothing comparable to it is known from any ancient scientific text or literary allusion. It is a bit frightening to know that just before the fall of their great civilization, the ancient Greeks had come so close to our age, not only in their thought, but also in their scientific technology.
By 2009, scientists had gathered enough scans and images to reconstruct what the Antikythera mechanism had looked like. It had 30 gears intricately designed and expertly crafted. The gears drove dials and hands on the front and back of the device. Despite all this information, they still didn't know precisely what it did. While the world waited for more information on this mysterious device, that opened the door to a lot of theories.
I love theories.
I know you do. One theory said the device was a piece of technology taken from Atlantis. No culture on Earth at the time had this level of technology. If the mechanism was something powerful or important, it would make sense that Atlantean survivors would want to keep it safe.
I have to hide it from the Lemurians.
Right. Some people believe the mechanism was so advanced it was proof of a creator, like scaffolding left around a building after construction was completed. Another theory was that it was left behind by aliens, either accidentally or as a gift. Alien technology would explain how it ended up in the 1st century BC. But the most alarming opinion was that the Antikythera mechanism was a doomsday device, a weapon to depopulate the Earth, created by an ancient race of reptilians.
Lizard people!
Yeah, maybe it was a clock used to calculate a time when the weapon would be deployed.
Well, lizard people are very punctual.
Despite all this evidence, one of the most prevalent theories was that the whole thing was a hoax. Some people said it was nothing more than a single brass gear, and the scientists were making up the rest. What we do know for sure is the Antikythera mechanism isn't going anywhere. Even though it's been 123 years since it was pulled out of the ocean, we're still uncovering more of its secrets all the time. Eventually, we will know everything there is to know about this fascinating device, and maybe even design our own. But even if we can build one, the question is, should we? In the Qinghai province of China, on the southern shore of Tuoso Lake, is a pyramid-shaped mountain called Mount Baigang. In 1996, archaeologist Bai Wu was exploring a cave inside Mount Baigang when he made an unexplainable and controversial discovery. Inside the cave, you found iron scraps all over the dirt floor.
Who found iron scraps?
You found.
I found?
You found.
Me?
You.
So confused.
Along with the iron scraps, there were oddly shaped stones standing on end. But most mysterious of all, there were iron pipes running deep into the mountain. And here the story takes a turn, because the cave wasn't naturally formed. It was a triangular-shaped entrance carved by somebody. And Mount Baigang wasn't a mountain, it was a pyramid, also constructed by somebody. The more scientists looked at Mount Baigang, the more questions they had. None of this made sense. This is the middle of nowhere. Nobody lives there, and as far as anyone knew, nobody ever had. And those iron pipes? According to the Beijing Institute of Geology, the pipes were forged more than 150,000 years ago. The pipes vary in size from 18 inches in diameter to as thin as a grain of rice, and later expeditions found pipes big enough to walk through. And there were humans living all over the world at that time, but metallurgy wasn't discovered until about 10,000 BC. So who created the pipes and why? While there is no clear purpose for the pipes, more are found at Lake Tuosu 260 feet away, along with more strange stones. The pipes at the lake are both above and below the water level. Some researchers believe the pipes were used to pump water into the pyramid, possibly for cooling purposes. Considering Tuoso is a salt lake, one theory suggests the pipes may have been used for a process called electrolysis. When you pass an electric current through water, the water molecules separate into oxygen and hydrogen atoms. Salt water is a better conductor than fresh water. The salt helps separate the oxygen and hydrogen more efficiently. And hydrogen can be used for a lot of things, like refining oil, treating metals, and processing foods. But hydrogen can also be used as fuel. In addition to dating the pipes, the Beijing Institute of Geology tested the pipes' composition. They're made up of 30% rusted iron. They also contain large amounts of silicon dioxide, which is commonly found in quartz, as well as calcium oxide, also known as quicklime. These are interesting materials. Iron conducts heat and electricity, and when quartz is subjected to stress, like millions of gallons of water flowing through a pipe, it generates electricity. This is called the piezoelectric effect. Remember, the Great Pyramid in Egypt is also built near a water source. Well, technically, it's on top of one. There's a large aquifer under the Giza Plateau. Also, there are chambers within the Great Pyramid made of quartz, and metal pipes have been discovered within the pyramid complex. Nikola Tesla built his famous Wardenclyffe Tower using these same principles. Using this ancient method, Tesla believed he could generate free, unlimited energy that could be beamed wirelessly to any place on Earth.
The Illuminati would never allow that.
They didn't. When Tesla was close to a discovery, his investors pulled their funding and invested in oil instead. Wardenclyffe Tower was eventually abandoned. Now, if you're interested in specifically how this works and what happened to Tesla's tower, I've linked to another episode below. Now, calcium oxide or quicklime found in the pipes is also interesting. Quicklime is highly volatile and chemically reactive. If you expose quicklime to water, it causes an exothermic reaction. In other words, it generates heat. Lots of heat. 1 liter of water combined with about 7 pounds of quicklime generates about 3.5 megajoules of energy. That's basically a gallon of gas. And if you remove the water, quicklime reverts back to its original state. And as long as you have a stable water source, like a lake, you could repeat this process over and over again. Now, besides these common materials, the pipes also contain 8% of a material that could not be identified. But here's a thought. We've got iron pipes that can carry water or some other medium, electricity to convert water into oxygen and hydrogen. We've got quicklime, which, when exposed to water, creates heat. The heat causes the hydrogen to expand. The expansion of the quartz within the pipes generates even more electricity, and this process can repeat over and over again, all happening inside a pyramid. Well, that's the same process used to make the Great Pyramid of Giza a power plant, all built 150,000 years ago. I know what that sounds like to me. In the 9th century, on a grassy field somewhere in northern England, a Nordic Viking squares off against a Saxon housecarl. Before knights, the housecarl was the highly trained elite warrior of medieval Europe. Against the Viking, this warrior should have the advantage. The Saxon wears chainmail armor, while the Viking wears only leather. The Saxon has a shield, light and strong. The Viking has no shield. And the Saxon sword is larger and stronger than the Viking's. The Saxon warrior is confident. He charges forward and takes a few heavy swings. The Viking defends with his short sword. The Saxon steps back, confused. He's fought Vikings before. Usually their short, blunt weapons shatter when hit with heavy English steel. But this Viking has a magic sword. At least it appears to be magic to this 9th century Saxon. Being lighter and faster, the Viking sidesteps, then lunges forward. He thrusts his razor-sharp blade through the Saxon's chainmail. His armor should have easily protected him from this attack, but the Viking's sword pierces the chainmail like it's not even there. The Saxon falls to his knees as the Viking withdraws his sword. The Saxon, more confused than frightened, sees writing on the side of the blade. A name. It's a name he's heard before. And in that moment, everything makes sense. Then the world goes black. This blade and others like it were virtually indestructible and unbeatable in battle. They weren't elaborate swords gilded with gold or jewels. They were pretty ordinary looking, but they were easy to identify as they all shared the same inscription, Ulfbert. Created using a process that would remain unknown for centuries, the Ulfbert was a revolutionary high-tech tool. There were only 170 of these swords left in existence, all forged sometime between 800 and 1000 AD. Though Ulfbert swords are usually associated with Vikings, it's actually a word of Frankish origin. It was most likely the name of the swordsmith who created the blades. Now, the process of making a sword in the 11th century wasn't an easy one. In order for iron to be used as a weapon, it had to be forged into steel. So iron was mined and smelted in a furnace with charcoal, which is mostly carbon. Iron itself is too soft to be used as a sword. The blade would bend and chip and lose its edge too quickly to be useful. The carbon hardens the iron, so it keeps its shape and sharp edge for longer. But add too much carbon, the metal becomes brittle. It took a skilled and talented smith to get the mixture just right. Now, once hot enough, the iron forms a gooey, spongy mass called a bloom. And after the bloom is removed from the heat, it's hammered over and over again to remove impurities known as slag. Slag is typically trace amounts of silicon, manganese, sulfur, and other elements. Blacksmiths would heat and hammer the metal over and over again to separate as much slag from the iron as possible. And because of the limited technology of the time, the impurity of the steel was still pretty high, and the amount of carbon they were able to get into the metal was pretty low. Even the best medieval steel is primitive to even the lowest quality steel that we produce today, except for Ulfbert steel. Experts have said that an Ulfbert sword would have been like a lightsaber in medieval Europe, and that's not that much of an exaggeration. Ulfbert swords were centuries ahead of the competition. They were superior to all others in sharpness, in strength, flexibility. Ulfbert steel was also very lightweight. This was a huge and unfair advantage in combat. The sword could withstand an enemy's blow without breaking, a common fear among warriors. In a time when fighters wore coats of chainmail, an Ulfbert sword could cut through this defense more effectively than other swords. Modern scientists have examined Ulfbert blades to try to find out what made them so special. Now, first they found that almost all impurities were removed from the steel. Ulfbert blades also had a carbon content 3 times higher than other swords from the same period. Now, here's the thing. To achieve this level of purity and the carbon content of the Ulfbert sword, the metal would have needed to have been liquefied. This causes carbon to dissolve into the iron, forming an alloy. The high temperature also removes impurities more effectively. A temperature of 2400 degrees Fahrenheit is needed for this process. The resulting alloy is called crucible steel because the metal is melted in a large crucible. Now, for hundreds of years, smiths tried to duplicate Ulfbert's steel, but nobody could come close. Ulfbert was a man 1,000 years ahead of his time, and nobody knows who he was. But many people still wonder, what else did he know? Physicist Francis Perrin sat at a nuclear plant in the south of France, thinking to himself, this cannot be possible. He was examining a dark piece of uranium ore, but what he discovered didn't make sense. This piece of uranium had somehow undergone nuclear fission. But this uranium was mined. Nuclear fission doesn't just happen in nature. And even more confusing, this uranium ore was almost 2 billion years old. Atoms are the building blocks of all matter in the universe. The sun, the earth, the air we breathe, our bodies themselves, everything is made up of atoms. But atoms can be split. And when that happens, energy is released. And this energy can be harnessed and used to charge your phone or power an entire city, or splitting an atom is called nuclear fission, and it's a very delicate process. To start, you'll need a high-quality fuel source like uranium or plutonium, and this is thankfully hard to find. And even if you do find it, it has to be refined before it can be used. Next, you need pure water, like really pure.
So no chance of a nuclear reactor in here, huh?
None.
Unless it works with vodka.
It doesn't. The water used for the fission process in a nuclear power plant has to have all minerals removed. Then it's filtered and finally distilled. If there's even just a few contaminated parts per million in the water, fission won't happen. Naturally, uranium contains a very consistent and specific amount of the isotope uranium-235. And when U-235 is split, for a brief moment it absorbs a neutron and is turned into U-236. Then U-236 is split into other elements like barium, krypton, or strontium. Since all natural uranium decays at the same rate, any uranium pulled out of the Earth should have the same exact amount of U-235. The only way, literally the only way, for uranium ore to have a lower percentage of U-235 is through nuclear fission. So Francis Perrin was faced with concrete evidence that nuclear fission had not only occurred before it was discovered, but it happened 1.8 billion years before. After further study, Perrin and his peers concluded the uranium ore had to be natural, and fission somehow occurred naturally. But American chemist Glenn Seaborg didn't agree. He said in order for U-235 to burn through fission, the conditions would have needed to be exactly right. They'd have to be perfect, too perfect for nature. Man-made nuclear reactors are built with extreme precision, and no natural water source would even be close to pure enough to keep the reaction going. For this to happen on Earth 2 billion years ago was impossible. Further investigation revealed high concentrations of fission byproducts within the mine, indicating nuclear chain reactions had definitely taken place. Also, the geology of the region contained radioactive waste that proved the controlled use of a nuclear reactor that ran for 500,000 years. At the time the reactor was operating, the only life on Earth was single-celled organisms. Or out-of-place artifacts are sometimes called OO parts, and there are a lot of them out there. These were just a few of my favorites. But how many of these objects are really out of place? Now, I love the legend of the Dropa stones, but it's ultimately disappointing. The original story from 1962 is credited to writer Reinhard Wegman, but no record of a writer by that name can be found. Same with the archaeologist who discovered the stones, Chupu Te, and Sum Nui, the professor who studied them. They don't exist either. No academic works can be found for either of them, and their names aren't even Chinese. Wegener's photos of the Dropa discs are pretty low resolution. You can't see any details like the hieroglyphics the stones supposedly had. It's more likely what he was taking a picture of was a jade B disc. B discs are elaborately decorated discs cut from jade, and B discs are old. They've been dated as early as 3000 BC and maybe even older, but they were fairly common. The only mystery is we really don't know what the discs were for. They probably have something to do with funerals because they've been found in graves of important people. And there's David Agamon's book, Exile of the Sun Gods, which details an expedition into Tibet. On that expedition, a race of people is encountered who call themselves the Dropa. The Dropa claim they were descendants of extraterrestrials. The book tells the story of their UFO crash, their history, and the artifacts they left behind, which included discs with mysterious hieroglyphics.
Such a great story.
It is, but it never happened.
Oh no.
In 1995, Agamon, whose real name is David Gaiman, sat for an interview with the magazine The Fortean Times. He admitted that the story was all made up.
The narrative was edited by David Agamon and included a photograph of a curious disc-shaped plate embossed with pictograms that seemed to be part of a record of the journey of the star beings from their homeworld. The author, David Gaiman, admitted to FT recently it had been written as satire on the alien intervention in human evolution genre. Still, it is regarded in some quarters as an authentic ancient astronaut event.
He claimed it was his greatest hoax and said his only regret was that the book didn't sell better. There isn't a single person, living or dead, that's been confirmed to have seen a Dropa stone, so I think this one is a hoax.
Oh.
Now, the Antikythera mechanism is not a hoax.
Oh?
That is a real object, and it was found on an ancient Roman shipwreck. It really was on that ship 2,000 years ago. All of that is true. But despite all the wild theories surrounding the device, the truth is actually anticlimactic and comes down to a simple misunderstanding. Many people assume, and many journalists state, the Antikythera mechanism is the only device of its kind, and that it was created with technology far beyond what existed at the time. Well, that's not true. Devices like this one are well documented in ancient writings, and were known about long before it was found in 1900. What made the Antikythera mechanism special was that it survived. It's the only known artifact of one of these devices in existence. Another misconception is that we don't know what it does, but we actually do.
Well, how do we know?
It has labels on it.
Oh.
Small colored stones show the position and motions of the planets. The sun and moon were shown relative to the constellations of the zodiac. It predicted solar and lunar eclipses, and what color the eclipses would be. It had a 365-day solar calendar, and a lunar calendar 19 years long. A small colored stone rotated to show the phases of the moon. There was even a dial showing a countdown to the next Olympic Games, so it probably wasn't created by aliens.
Well, maybe aliens are big sports fans.
Maybe, but aliens probably follow sports using equipment more advanced than something made from gears. Plus, the device has been recreated using X-ray and gamma-ray imaging. Turns out, the thing wasn't all that accurate. So the Antikythera device is real and a fascinating piece of engineering, but it isn't an out-of-place artifact. Next, the Mount Bygone Pyramid probably isn't a pyramid. In fact, the word Bygone just means hill in the local dialect.
This is getting depressing.
While the caves may appear man-made, they probably aren't. The triangular shape of the entrance only looks that way from a certain angle, and there's no indication of two collapsed entrances or anything artificially created. The pipes, though, they can't really be explained.
Yaha!
They really do appear to be forged metal pipes. They're really made of rusted iron, quartz, and quicklime. That's all true. And the archaeologist who discovered them, Bayou, is a real person.
Who's real?
You is.
I is?
No, you is.
Me is?
You.
That's what I said.
Look, I don't want to do this again.
Who doesn't?
Me.
You?
Stop it! The mainstream theory is that the Bygone pipes are just tree roots.
Tree roots?
Yep. Tree roots can turn to stone through a process known as permineralization, which is a type of fossilization. This happens over a long period, often taking thousands to millions of years. Now, this theory sounds plausible, but the only source for the claim is an article by Jinmin Weekly from 2003. The article was originally in Chinese, but the English translation says they found fossilized plant matter inside the tubes. This could be proof that the pipes are in fact tree roots, or indicate at some point in the last 150,000 years, algae or moss grew inside the pipes. It's still a mystery. Now, on the surface, the Ulfbert swords defy science. Metal of such high quality didn't exist at the time, except it did. It was rare, but it did exist. You've probably heard of Damascus steel. Damascus steel is one of the most legendary steels ever made. It's extremely durable and contains almost no impurities. The traditional method of producing Damascus steel has actually been lost to history, but experts believe the process involves layering iron and steel or multiple types of steel. The metals are then forged together by repeated folding and welding. This process may be repeated many times to create hundreds or even thousands of layers. This is what creates the unique patterns that Damascus steel is known for. Damascus steel was of quality equal to, and probably even better than the Ulfberht swords. And Damascus blades were around 1,000 years earlier. They just didn't become widely known until many years later. But nobody in Europe was producing steel like this until Ulfberht. Ulfberht swords were extremely rare and extremely expensive. An average soldier wouldn't have used one of these and probably never even saw one. They were so expensive, not just because of their quality, they were forged with raw materials not found in Europe. Most likely, steel ingots from Asia were brought by merchants to the Rhineland, which is now Germany. After being forged in the Rhineland, they were most likely shipped north to Scandinavia. Many still believe such advanced blades would have been impossible to create with medieval technology, but modern blacksmiths have been able to replicate the process. It's not easy to do, but it is possible. Ulfberht was, during his time, one of the most talented weapons makers in the world. Though nobody knows who he is, 1,000 years later, people still know his name. The Oklo reactor legend is partly true and partly false. First, chemist Glenn Seaborg never said it had to be man-made. He did say for it to be naturally occurring, the conditions would have to be perfect. People then took that as a claim and ran with it. In order for a chain reaction to occur, the amount of U-235 would need to be at critical mass, around 3 to 5%. Now, the current amount found in natural uranium is 0.7%. This isn't enough for fission to occur. But 1.8 billion years ago, the percentage of U-235 would have been much higher, enough to start a nuclear chain reaction. The likelihood of water being pure enough is slim, but not impossible. There's chemical evidence that a nuclear reaction did occur. Most articles and videos about the Oklo reactor describe it as a nuclear explosion like an atomic bomb, but that's not what happened. The uranium did undergo natural fission, but it was a slow burn that happened over 500,000 years. That's not as dramatic as a mushroom cloud, but it's pretty close to how modern nuclear reactors work. And that brings up an interesting point. In the distant future, all evidence of the human race will be completely gone. If a cataclysm wiped out the human race tomorrow, it would take just a few years for nature to reclaim urban areas. In a few thousand years, all cities are buried. In 100,000 years, all human remains are fossilized. In 1,000,000 years, all evidence of the human race will have mineralized. Even styrofoam and plastic turns to stone and crumbles. In 10 million years, all that stone, the fossils, and every bit of evidence of the entire human race is recycled back into the Earth's mantle. An archaeologist far in the future would never know we even existed, unless he finds and tests uranium. Evidence of our nuclear technology would still be detectable in uranium. That future archaeologist will be confused because even though there's no evidence of civilization or technology, the uranium he finds will show evidence of fission. Other scientists will come up with theories about nuclear reactors that spontaneously appear in nature under perfect conditions. But the archaeologist feels there's more to the story. He has a nagging sense that millions of years ago, someone was here. And who's to say that this hasn't already happened? And that future archaeologist is us.
3+15+00.
Now, obviously, there are many more of these artifacts, so we can probably do a part 2. But just to name a few, the Dendera lights in Egypt look like people standing around a large light bulb with a filament. But, wait, should I debunk these now?
No. Save it for the next episode.
You're right. Okay, there's also a 2,000-year-old earthquake detector that was found in China.
Ancient Chinese secret, huh?
Well, it's not a secret.
I was doing a bit.
A bit about what?
Hello, Calgon?
Calgon? I don't follow.
Oh, for crying out loud. Hey, roll the clip.
We need more Calgon. Ancient Chinese secret, huh?
Oh, right. I remember that one.
Told ya.
Who were you talking to when you asked them to roll the clip?
Ancient goldfish secret. You should have seen that coming.
I should have.
You're getting slow in your old age.
Speaking of old age, up next is a video about Göbekli Tepe.
Segway, nice!
I think our video on Göbekli is about one of the best out there. But after you watch this, check out Jimmy Corsetia's video about how the WEF and Davos are a little too involved in this archaeological site.
Yeah, they're a little too involved with everything.
I agree. And we have an episode coming up about the Illuminati, so we'll get into some of how they're involved.
But not too involved.
Nope. When talking about certain powerful elites, you have to be very careful, and I'm serious. Not only could the channel get demonetized, but our channel could be deleted.
Yeah, especially if we joke about the Clintons.
We do not joke about the Clintons.
I know, but you gotta admit that it's strange. Okay. No Clinton jokes, I get it.
So, Göbekli Tepe. In Jimmy's video, he asked a question that we've all been asking for years. Why aren't we still digging? We know for a fact there's way more to the site. So, what else is down there? We are the descendants of an ancient civilization, one which mastered technology, mapped the cosmos, and understood our relationship with the natural world. Our ancestors traveled the world and built enormous structures. They scaled their creations into cities. They shared a common governance and similar religious beliefs. Our ancestors lived, as we do today, as a global society. Then around 14,500 years ago, this global superpower started to collapse. First came uncontrollable change, and then a cataclysm. In less than a week, everything and almost everyone was gone. Those left behind built monuments. Monuments not as tributes to gods or homage to kings. The monuments are a warning to future generations, to us. That warning is simple. Danger is coming. Our civilization has ended before, and it will end again. This is one story that big archaeology and world governments don't want you to know. Because once you hear it, you'll never trust them again. Because the danger that's coming, there's not a thing they can do to stop it. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt was touring Turkish Neolithic sites when he spotted a limestone block poking out from a hillside. The locals call the area Potbelly Hill, or in their language, Göbekli Tepe. Schmidt and his team began excavating the hillside around the limestone, and though they didn't know it at the time, what they discovered would change everything we know about human history. We've all been taught the official story, the big archaeology story of the origin of human civilization. Stone Age hunter-gatherers emerged from the last ice age and eventually discovered farming. These people organized into settlements in Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent. Then, about 6,000 years ago, the first civilization was born, ancient Sumer. Stone Age humans before Sumer were primitive. Their most advanced technology was stone tools. At Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists uncovered 4 man-made stone enclosures covering 100,000 square feet of land. That's interesting, but there was a problem. The earliest parts of Göbekli Tepe were built 11,600 years ago. That's 6,000 years before the ancient Sumerians were doing anything. Now this didn't make sense at all. 11,600 years ago was the end of the last ice age. Big archaeology said this far back in time, humans were following the migration of animals. They built temporary camps or at most mud huts. Humans were not building enormous, permanent stone structures. They didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have the tools. They didn't have the talent. Yet, here it was. So the more they dug, the more things stopped making sense. Soon archaeologists learned that the enclosures weren't built at the same time. This indicates long-term occupation of the site. Well, how long? Well, the newest structure was built about 10,500 years ago. That means Göbekli Tepe was occupied for over 1,000 years. Now, 1,000 years doesn't sound that long, but in human history, 1,000 years is a very long time. That's enough time for the Roman Empire to rise and fall again. The excavation of Göbekli Tepe continued, and from the perspective of the scientific establishment, things just kept getting worse. Göbekli Tepe wasn't haphazardly thrown together by Stone Age primitives. It was built strategically for a purpose. The 4 enclosures are circular, between 20 and 200 feet across, and all are angled toward the star Sirius. Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. Many cultures throughout history built temples angled at Sirius, but not 12,000 years ago. Yet here it was. Over the course of 1,100 years, Sirius's alignment moved across the night sky, so the builders of Göbekli Tepe created newer enclosures to follow each realignment. To build these monuments required an understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. A project of this size would also require skills like community planning, administration, and division of labor. Big Archaeology said people during this time had not yet acquired these skills. Yet here it was. Within each enclosure are T-shaped pillars, some of them 16 feet tall, each weighing up to 10 tons. 43 pillars have been excavated so far, but the Göbekli Tepe story is just getting started. Only 5% of the site has been uncovered. Recent LiDAR imaging revealed at least 15 to 20 additional structures and enclosures buried beneath the main site, and there are more than 200 additional stone pillars. Now, about those stone pillars, there's something very strange going on. Engraved on the pillars are depictions of humans, animals, and human-animal hybrids. There are foxes, lions, scorpions, snakes, boar, wild donkey, gazelles, there's all kinds of things. And the work is very advanced. But the most advanced carvings are on the oldest pillars. As the site gets newer, the designs get less intricate. It's like technology and craftsmanship suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Somehow, 7,000 years before Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Giza were built, and 6,000 years before the invention of writing, humans were capable of building this. Where did the builders get this sudden knowledge?
The Anunnaki.
Well, the answer to that question is controversial.
The Anunnaki.
Maybe the human story doesn't start at the end of the last ice age like Big Archaeology wants us to think. Maybe before the last ice age, the Earth was home to an older and much more advanced civilization. That civilization then taught the primitive local hunter-gatherers about mathematics and engineering. They also taught these primitive humans astronomy and told them to pay very close attention to the sky. These ancients then told the local people their story of the time before the Ice Age, when their civilization flourished. Pillar 43 in Enclosure D has become known as the Vulture Stone. On the Vulture Stone, there's a detailed carving that tells the story of these ancient people. Unfortunately, it's also the story of the end of the world. Pillar 43 in Enclosure D, also known as the Vulture Stone, depicts the worst day in human history. Engraved on the pillar are asterisms, which are bright star clusters like constellations. Pillar 43 points to Scorpius. Now, to be fair to skeptics, every culture is going to have different representations for their constellations. But look at the drawing on the Vulture Stone. Without a doubt, that is a scorpion. When the constellation Scorpius is lined up with the night sky, all the other drawings fall into place, each of them representing constellations. A sun sits atop the vulture's wing in the design, showing its placement in the sky in relation to the stars. If we use the central sun as a guide to line up the constellations, it reveals a star map, and every star map is a date stamp. Take the Hoover Dam, for example. Engraved on the floor of the dam is the exact configuration of the stars as seen from that location on the day the dam opened.
Ew, why did they carve that in the damn floor?
So if the structure is found thousands or millions of years from now, archaeologists will know the exact date.
The date the damn people made it.
Right.
Damn good idea.
The Vulture Stone shows the only time in history that this specific configuration of stars could be seen from Göbekli Tepe. It was a 100-year window between 10,900 to 10,800 BC, about 13,000 years ago. But wait, this is more than 1,000 years before Göbekli Tepe was built. So this tablet is telling a story of something that happened in the past. It's the story of a time period commonly referred to as the Younger Dryas, and the terror from the sky that changed the face of the earth. The Ice Age lasted about 2.6 million years. Most of the northern hemisphere was covered by miles-thick sheets of ice. 30% of the Earth's surface was covered by glaciers. This sounds bad, but for the human race, it was good. Sure, the climate was cold, but it wasn't cold everywhere. Most of Africa and the Middle East were warm, with plenty of plant and animal life. And the climate was consistent for 2.6 million years. Hominids had a nice, stable climate in which to evolve during this time. Homo sapiens, modern humans, emerged during this time. We were born in the Ice Age. We thrived in it. Then the climate started changing. Temperatures became warmer year after year. The ice sheets slowly melted. Sea levels gradually rose. This would have been a concern for the human civilization, but they were helpless to do anything about it.
Oh, so you admit that even if the climate is getting warmer, there's nothing we can do about it?
Well, that's an open debate.
How dare you!
Then suddenly, around 12,900 years ago, the Earth got cold again. Not as cold as before, but cold enough that humans understood how to survive and thrive in these conditions. This mini ice age was essentially a return to normal. But 1,000 years later, this age of normalcy ended violently and suddenly. The ice sheets melted as they had before, but not over 2.6 million years. This time the ice melted in weeks. There was no time for civilization to adjust. This was the cataclysm. And there's evidence of this cataclysm in ice core samples taken from Greenland and Antarctica. There's evidence in sediment cores from the bottom of lakes and oceans. There's evidence in organic material that's been carbon dated. But there's also evidence of this disaster on Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone. Along with giving us a date, the tablet also depicts the comet impact of the Younger Dryas. At the bottom of the pillar is a headless man, linking the date to death. There's also a snake coming from the south. This has been said to represent 3 giant waves washing over the Earth. Those could have been the tsunamis that we know for sure happened. But Pillar 43 is only a piece of the story. Pillar 56 depicts more of the Younger Dryas impact, waves crashing, animals fleeing. Now, those are scary, but to me, Pillar 18 is the most ominous depiction at Göbekli Tepe. First of all, it contains the only word on the whole site. The word is God.
Maybe it was saying, oh God, we're gonna die. Oh God, please save us.
I think it was saying exactly that.
Wait, I was just joking.
Well, I think something very bad happened, and this pillar is a plea for help.
Oh, my joke isn't very funny anymore.
Pillar 18 in Enclosure D focuses on the constellation we know as Aquarius. But when it was built, the pillar was probably centered on Taurus. Now, if that's true, we now have a very big piece of this puzzle. The comet Encke was discovered in 1786 and takes about 3 years to orbit the sun. Encke is about 3 miles wide. Not a huge comet, but not small either. The thing is, it used to be bigger. Much bigger. It was part of what scientists call a megacomet, 100 miles wide, and not just made of ice, but also glass, metal, and rock. About 20,000 years ago, the megacomet broke up.
This is good, right?
Oh no, this is bad. Really bad. When the 100-mile megacomet broke up, it created an enormous debris field. Now instead of one megacomet, you've got millions of smaller comets, ranging in size from grains of sand to over a mile across. When the Earth passed through that cloud of debris, the people at Göbekli Tepe would have seen a firestorm of comets raining down on the Earth, all coming from the Aquarius constellation, just as is depicted on Pillar 43. But here's the scary part. We fly through that same debris field every year. It's called the Taurid meteor shower, and it's caused a lot of damage through the years. And if you're watching this in September, October, or November, we're flying through it right now. When Göbekli Tepe was discovered, big archaeology had no choice but to admit they had underestimated the technological abilities of early man by, about 5,000 years. It must be a mistake, they said. After all, their grant money depends on them being right. No need to fund a search for, let's say, a mummy in a pyramid that's not going to be there. But in 2019, more bad news for the mainstream. That year, excavations started at Karahan Tepe, about 40 miles from Göbekli Tepe. Initial estimates say it might have been settled before Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe seems to have been built for a single purpose, maybe a place of worship or an observatory. Karahan Tepe is very different. It shows obvious signs of a structured society. Now, there are many different types of buildings at Karahan Tepe. Some could be shops or residences or food storage. Vessels, grindstones, flint, plates, and all kinds of other objects have been found at Karahan Tepe. These types of artifacts haven't been found at Göbekli Tepe, suggesting the two sites served very different social functions. But these places existed at the same time. So it's possible Göbekli Tepe was a religious center, where Karahan Tepe was a residential neighborhood, or maybe a shopping district. And if that's true, there must be more settlements in the area yet to be found.
There's more?
Lots more. In 2021, the Turkish government announced the discovery of at least 11 additional hillsides, which contain structures very much like Göbekli Tepe. The hillsides make up a 100-mile ring with Göbekli Tepe in the center. These sites are known collectively as Taztepeler. Now, instead of an area inhabited by nomadic primitives, Taztepeler is a metropolis. Sayburç was uncovered by archaeologists in 2021, around 10 miles from Göbekli Tepe. Sayburç is one of the most complex settlements in the area. Archaeologists found communal buildings big enough to seat 50 people. There are communal halls covered with countless engravings of humans and animals. To the south of the communal buildings are ancient residential homes. The layout of each of the Taztepeler archaeological sites suggests hundreds of thousands of people live there permanently, right after the Younger Dryas changed the face of the world. But there's a site discovered in 2008, about 180 miles away, which really broke history, and suggests Taztepeler may have been a capital in what was a very busy region. While digging a dam in the area, engineers rediscovered the settlement of Bankuklu Tarla.
Damn engineers.
Look, you don't have to keep tagging that joke.
Oh, you don't like my damn jokes, eh?
The Bankuklu Tarla settlement is between 12,000 and 13,000 years old. That means it was built within the Younger Dryas cold period, before the flood.
The structure found has similar features with Göbekli Tepe and the structures belonging to this period in the region. The building has a unique architectural style, shape, and interior arrangement, unique with these features. We can say that it is a temple that dates back to 12,000 years.
This is where the existence of an ancient advanced civilization starts to become almost irrefutable. Bankuklu Tarla has all the things we find on Taztepeler: private buildings, public spaces. It's got storage rooms, tools, ornamental objects. It's got mega and microliths. The people of Bankuklu Tarla were so advanced, they even built a sewer system. More than 130 skeletons have been found there, each buried with hundreds of thousands of beads. The manufacturing of beads proves that there was a division of labor, an artisan class. It proves that the people had time for more than just hunting and gathering. They had time to make art.
Making beads is more of a craft than art, but I get your meaning.
So big archaeology was wrong again. Very, very wrong. This area of Turkey shows that thousands of people lived there in organized communities. They built neighborhoods and temples. They had shops and large halls for gathering. They had division of labor. They were experts at stonework. They understood mathematics and astronomy. They were talented engineers. And this was 12,000 years ago. But where's the evidence of people learning these skills? If the people at Göbekli Tepe were putting up 10-ton stone pillars 10 to 12,000 years ago, shouldn't we see communities learning these skills 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago? We should see an evolution of technology that takes thousands of years. But we don't. This advanced technology just appeared. But that's not exactly true. The people in the area around Göbekli Tepe, Bankuklu Tarla, and Sayburç were taught this technology after the Great Flood. It was a gift to them, a gift from the people of the sea. Mainstream or big archaeology gets things wrong. A lot of things. Göbekli Tepe shouldn't be there. Neither should Karahan Tepe, Bangkok Tarla, or any of the other settlements in the area. We're told the Great Pyramids of Giza are tombs built for pharaohs, but no mummy has ever been found in a tomb. Not one, not ever. But in the Great Pyramid, we did find evidence that it might have been used as an ancient power plant. Big archaeology hates that idea. Now, when I was growing up, we were taught that Native Americans first arrived in North America by crossing the Bering Land Bridge in Alaska between 10 to 12,000 years ago. This was called the Clovis First model because some stone tools were found in Clovis, New Mexico. Big archaeology wasn't even close on how people got to the Americas, or when. The Monte Verde site in Chile blew up the Clovis model when it was dated to 14,800 years ago. Buttermilk Creek Complex in Texas was dated to about 15,500 years ago. The Bluefish Caves in Yukon, Canada have evidence suggesting human activity as far back as 24,000 years ago. Plus, there's hard evidence that people from Polynesia in the South Pacific traded with and mated with tribes in Guatemala many years before Columbus. And they didn't cross the Bering Land Bridge in Alaska. They sailed thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean. This means they had advanced shipmaking skills and seamanship. They had knowledge of astronomy and the weather.
To make that trip, they also had to have balls of steel.
I would have preferred that you said nerves of steel, but yeah, they were brave. Big archaeology knows the Mayan culture had a large population, but they were not considered to be very technologically advanced. But in 2023, researchers deep in the Guatemalan jungle discovered a sprawling Mayan civilization. It covers more than 650 square miles. And here's the crazy thing. The cities were interconnected by a series of superhighways. And these weren't just paths or dirt roads. The roads were elevated to allow for drainage and even paved with white plaster. The Romans get a lot of credit for creating the first roads, but the Mayans beat the Romans to it by about 2,000 years.
They're the world's first superhighway system that we have. What's amazing about them is that they unite all these cities together like a spider web, which forms one of the earliest and first state societies in the Western Hemisphere.
So big archaeology was wrong about Mayan technology, but they still had to get in the last word. Mainstream said, sure, they had hundreds of miles of roads, but they didn't have vehicles, they just walked. No animals or people pulling carts, they just walked hundreds of miles. Big archaeology said this is because the Mayans didn't discover the wheel. But Mayan toys have been discovered that have wheels. Big archaeology says the Mayans never thought to scale them up to put them on carts. How do we know this? Big archaeology says we know this because we haven't discovered the carts. Oh. But a year ago, big archaeology would have said there's no way the Mayans could have built a highway system. Why not? Well, because we haven't found one. Yet there it is. Big archaeology is quick to take a lack of evidence at face value, regardless of common sense. Like there was no such thing as the city of Dwarka, the advanced and prosperous city in India that was consumed by a great flood. That was all a myth. Then Dwarka was found and dated to the Younger Dryas. There's no such thing as Atlantis, but it's hard to explain the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, or the ancient city off the coast of Cuba that could be anywhere from 6,000 to 50,000 years old. There's no such thing as Mu, the continent that once connected Greece to Easter Island. Yet the languages from those two cultures share about 1,000 words. And the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan is right where Mu would have been. There was no such thing as Derinkuyu, the secret underground city that hid 20,000 people from danger for thousands of years. That was just a local myth. Then a man tried expanding his basement and realized it's already been expanded, and the lost city of Derinkuyu was discovered. And that's why big archaeology says there was no advanced culture before the flood, because there's no evidence of it. Except there is. Every culture has a flood myth. Long before Noah built the ark, a great flood turned up in Mesopotamia in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The ancient Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, Hindus, they all have a legend of a deluge that wiped the earth clean. The flood myth really is worldwide. The Norse had their own version of the Noah's Ark story. The Inca, the Aztec, tribes across America, Japanese, Chinese, Hawaiian, Australian Aboriginal. This is just to name a few. The list is much longer. Now, the legends vary, but they're all basically the same plot. People are misbehaving, so a flood is sent to wipe them out and start over with a few survivors. Now, I don't know about the misbehaving part, but we're pretty sure the flood really happened. But some of the flood legends have a twist. Those legends say that before the flood, there were advanced civilizations who flourished on their own continents, while primitive humans were still figuring out stone tools. Atlantis was a powerful and advanced island nation. It was larger than Asia and ruled by the descendants of gods. Atlantis was prosperous and technologically advanced, but the people became corrupt, prompting the gods to sink the island into the ocean in a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods. Lemuria was a huge continent in the Pacific Ocean. Lemuria was home to a spiritually advanced civilization that was sometimes ally and sometimes enemy of Atlantis. And then there was Mu. Mu is a continent either in the Pacific Ocean or Indian Ocean. It was once inhabited by an advanced civilization. The survivors of Mu brought their wisdom and began the civilizations of ancient Egypt and the Maya. Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu are all similar stories in that they were highly advanced civilizations. All existed around 9600 BC, all destroyed by a great flood. But in all three stories, there are a few survivors. After the floodwaters recede and their homelands are destroyed, these survivors seek refuge on the mainland. The people they find are kind but primitive, so the survivors grant them the gift of civilization.
And when you show up somewhere, it's always polite to bring something. Flour, bottle of wine, civilization.
I agree, that's just good manners. But it's at this time that agriculture explodes across the Middle East. Megalithic structures now appear. Complex cities emerge, all seemingly overnight. In Hindu, Matsya takes the form of a fish and guides King Manu to reestablish civilization. In Mesopotamia, Oannes emerged from the sea as half man, half fish.
A merman?
Yep.
Hey, ask him if he has a sister, will ya?
Oannes teaches the Sumerians agriculture, writing, law, and all knowledge crucial for civilization. Quetzalcoatl, also associated with water, brought civilization to the Aztecs. In Egyptian, Polynesian, Japanese, Chinese, Norse, Hawaiian, Native American, there's a godlike teacher who comes from the sea to help restart civilization. And these saviors or teachers or whatever you want to call them, they all appear after the Great Flood at the end of the Younger Dryas. And they all transfer wisdom and knowledge to the primitive people that they meet and restart civilization. And there's more evidence. The cultures around the world seem to have been given the same knowledge. For example, Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. Every culture knows about it, but every culture, new and old, refers to Sirius as a dog or a wolf. In ancient Iraq, Sirius was called the dog star that leads. In China, it was known as the heavenly wolf. Assyrians and Akkadians knew Sirius as the dog of the sun. And in North America, native tribes used largely canine terminology, like dog that follows mountain sheep or wolf star when referring to Sirius. Most cultures holding a reverence for the brightest star in the sky is understandable, but all of them referring to the same star as a dog or a wolf? That seems like a big coincidence.
We don't believe in those.
We don't. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, Bangkoklu Tarla, a bustling city, appears in Turkey. Karahan Tepe, with its homes and halls and magnificent art, appears. And Göbekli Tepe is built, an entire complex dedicated to the star Sirius. And within the complex, 10-ton stone pillars that tell the story of man, the fire from the sky, the flood that swallows the earth, and of civilization given a second chance. The pillars also offer a warning for future generations. For us, all that has happened before will happen again. The builders gave us symbols on stones and told us to watch the sky. They showed us the constellations to study. They gave us the exact date of the last disaster so we could prepare for the next one. because there's always a next one. The images carved in the stone pillars could be a guide to ensure humanity's survival. But if all that's true, why was it all intentionally buried? Around 10,000 years ago, the people of Göbekli Tepe took up a massive project. They filled in the entire compound with stone and debris. Then they covered it with earth and mud to make it seem like it was never there. There are two theories for why they did this. One, to preserve it, or two, to hide it. An advanced society destroyed by an ancient cataclysm, the survivors venture out into the world, spreading wisdom and knowledge and sowing the seeds of civilization. Then, in an instant, agriculture explodes, cities are born, and a new era of man begins. Just not the first era of man. Not only is this a great story, it's one of my favorite stories. I read Graham Hancock's book, Fingerprints of the Gods, in the 1990s, and I was hooked. I've been an ancient civilization junkie ever since. But is it true? Well, big archaeology says it's absolutely not true. But we've shown that lack of evidence is proof enough for the mainstream to say that something never existed. Only when dragged kicking and screaming to evidence of the Great Flood do they finally acknowledge it. And only when Göbekli Tepe is discovered does the date of the first civilization get pushed back. Then Bangkoklu Tarla is found and the date changes again. And it may change again and again. So big archaeology was wrong about how advanced the people of the Stone Age were. They were clearly advanced enough to build monolithic monuments and huge complex cities. It appears as if this skill and technology comes out of nowhere. We don't see older, smaller structures that show an evolution of technology that leads to something as magnificent as Göbekli Tepe. The technology just appeared. And it appeared at the end of the Younger Dryas, after the Great Flood. So it must be a transfer of technology from survivors of an ancient society whose civilization was lost beneath the waves. But let's be fair. There was an evolution of technology leading to Göbekli Tepe. Natufian culture existed in the same area about 15,000 years ago. They were unusual in that they settled the area permanently. There's evidence of cemeteries, architecture, food production, animal domestication, and burials with elaborate mortuary treatments. The Natufians built organized stone structures decorated with art. This is 2,000 years before Göbekli Tepe. Ayia Malaha was a Natufian settlement built around 12,000 years ago. They too used circular structures like those found at Göbekli Tepe. Pre-Natufian culture goes back to 23,000 years ago. Now, it's rare to find evidence of this culture, but it's not impossible. There are engravings, ornaments, and beads that are older than Göbekli Tepe, thousands of years older. The monoliths at Göbekli Tepe are impressive, but the Natufians also created huge slabs of decorated limestone. Not as elaborate, but they were made with skill and craftsmanship. Kortik Tepe is another mound discovered in the Anatolia area of Turkey. Found there are pieces of very elaborate pottery, carvings, jewelry, tools, and fishing hooks. Kortik Tepe has been dated from 12,400 years ago to 11,700 years ago. So not only older than Göbekli Tepe, this settlement existed during the cold snap of the Younger Dryas. Now, it is worth noting that Kortik Tepe disappears around the time of the flood. But before the flood, people lived there for 1,000 years. So there is evidence of an evolution of technology, not just with jewelry and engraving, but even building large monoliths, all thousands of years before Göbekli Tepe. One of the great mysteries is why Göbekli Tepe was deliberately filled in. Now, the working theory is the earlier structures were pretty big and dug into a mound. An earthquake hit, knocked everything into the mound, and made a mess of things. Then everyone in the area filled in the rest of the hole and built newer, smaller structures around the older, larger ones. Structures that were designed to withstand earthquakes. Now, no one really knows for sure, but it's a theory that makes sense to me. And there are some issues with the dates as well. The date on Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone, that's 13,000 years ago. That that doesn't line up with the end of the Younger Dryas, so it's not describing the Great Flood. But that date does line up with the beginning of the Younger Dryas. Was there an impact at that time too? Well, there probably was. It's believed that the abrupt cooling 13,000 years ago was caused by a series of events that happened at the same time. There are ice core samples that show an impact 12,887 years ago, and that date is accurate within 5 years. And this happened at the same time as a large volcanic eruption in Germany. This caused the Earth to be covered in soot, which caused years of darkness. Meanwhile, the impacts disrupted the ocean currents, so everything got cold again. Not as cold as before, but still cold. Then about 1,000 years later, another event, maybe another impact, maybe a massive solar event. We don't really know for sure, but something did happen to warm the Earth and melt the ice caps really fast. We do have evidence of cultures that existed before, during, and after the Younger Dryas. Now, did we debunk the idea of an advanced culture before that? Absolutely not. I'm just trying to give you the full picture. There absolutely could have been someone else here long ago. And we've talked before about how it would take only about 10,000 years before all evidence of the human race is gone. But here's the thing about that number. Civilization disappearing in 10,000 years assumes the Earth is peaceful. If one of these years the Taurid meteor shower threw a rock at us, like it did during the Younger Dryas, well, it wouldn't take 10,000 years to erase our civilization. We'd be gone in a day. Here's how it happens. It's a brisk November evening. Maybe this year, maybe 20 years from now. It doesn't matter. Every November, the Earth passes through the Taurid meteor cloud, and the Earth's sky lights up. People gather all over the world to see the event. Meteor watching parties are common. You and a few friends decide to get together and see the show. The sky does not disappoint. Shooting stars zip across the night sky like fireflies. There are even larger comets that streak by for a full second or two before burning out. And once in a while, a big one. It's a fireball that lights up the sky, and for a moment, night turns to day. Now, everyone's heart races, but fireballs like these are known to happen during the Taurid shower. People remember the Taurids of 2015. That year, fireballs hit the Earth in swarms. In 2020, a Taurid fireball exploded over Japan that sounded like a bomb going off. That one set off car alarms for miles. You continue to watch the sky and notice the shooting stars getting denser, thicker, then a fireball, then another. You feel a little anxiety, but the Taurid meteors have been happening your whole life, and they've been nothing more than a light show. Then another fireball. This one looks like it's close. It vaporizes in a flash of light so bright that you have to shield your eyes. You and your group of sky watchers giggle nervously. Then 3 seconds later, a crack, then a boom. So loud you feel it in your stomach. Everyone agrees. This was fun, but let's go home. But now there's another fireball. Everyone turns to see. This one is different. It's not really streaking across the sky, it's expanding somehow. No, it's not expanding, it's coming closer. It comes closer and closer, and there's no way to tell how big it is. From where you're standing, it's like a mountain made of fire. Just as panic sets in, it disappears somewhere over the horizon. You let out a deep sigh. You didn't realize it, but for the past 30 seconds, you've been holding your breath. You and your group are now frantically gathering your belongings. That was more than enough excitement for one evening. You even ask yourself if you even want to do this again next year. But that question has already been answered for you. You just didn't know it yet. Over the horizon, where the fireball disappeared, a ball of light emerges. Everything is lit up like the day. No, brighter than that. It's so bright, everything is just white. The ball of white light grows larger and larger, and you feel something deep in your brain. That part of your brain that evolved 2 million years ago, that lizard brain. It sends you a single message: run. You run. About 3,000 miles away, there has been an event. The meteor hits and vaporizes everything around the impact point for miles. Water, rock, cities, all vanish. Then the shock waves start. Earthquakes radiate out from the impact point over and over again as the Earth reverberates like a bell. These earthquakes move faster than the speed of sound. They're so powerful, they disrupt the tectonic plates of the Earth. That sets off a chain reaction of earthquakes and volcanoes across every major fault line. Forget LA and San Francisco. The San Andreas will either eat or burn the entire California coast. Then you've got the Cascadia subduction zone in the Pacific Northwest, the Hayward Fault, the Calaveras Fault, the Garlock, the Wasatch. They all erupt. From western Canada to Baja Mexico is leveled. Everything within 20 miles of the coast crumbles into the sea. Then the shock waves roll back around the planet again, and again, and again. The biggest fault system in the United States is the New Madrid seismic zone. The most powerful earthquakes in U.S. history have come from here. When that fault goes, say goodbye to Chicago, Indianapolis, St. Louis, and down to New Orleans. All gone, crumbled, on fire, or underwater. The New Madrid fault connects to the Ramapo fault in the east and sets it off like a fuse. Ramapo extends through Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Then the Charleston fault in South Carolina goes next. From Boston to Seattle, from Maine to Miami, and everything in between, earthquakes rock the country over and over again. And this is happening everywhere in the world. Then comes the wind. A Category 5 hurricane has wind speeds of 150 to 160 miles per hour. A Cat 5 hurricane is going to seem like a gentle afternoon. Rushing around the planet is a storm with winds over 1,000 miles per hour. This is called the air blast. Anything wooden is gone. Cars, boats, people, all gone. Only the sturdiest stone structures could survive the wind, but most stone structures have already been turned to rubble by the earthquakes. In some places, the wind lasts for 16 hours, and within the wind is everything. Buildings, cars, trees, everything. It's a food processor that pulverizes everything for hours. What happens next goes one of two ways. Option 1, the rock hits solid Earth. Now, if that happens, heat and ejecta cause wildfires for thousands of miles around the impact point. Radiating out from the center is a fireball moving at twice the speed of sound. This fireball is hotter than the surface of the sun. A land impact also launches millions and millions of tons of ejecta into the atmosphere. In fact, millions of tons of molten rock will leave the atmosphere and go into space. The rock cools and forms a shell of debris in orbit around the Earth. No more space station, no more satellites. The ejecta that remains in the atmosphere blocks out the sun for months. But it only takes a few days for plant life to start dying. The entire food chain is disrupted within a week and completely collapses in a month. All food is gone. And that's a land impact. Option 2 is an ocean impact. This is probably worse. The rock hits, vaporizes the ocean water, and collides with the bedrock. The earthquakes begin like before, but what's really dramatic is the tsunami. But it's much more than a tsunami, more than a mega tsunami. What this is, there's really no name for it. A wall of water rises about 1.5 miles in the air. The water would be higher than the clouds if there were clouds. The shock waves and air blast dissipated all the clouds, leaving only dark streaks of smoke that turn the sky blood red. The wall of water extends in all directions. It moves at 500 miles per hour. By the time it makes landfall, it's even higher. As the water tears across the land, it collects debris. Every object the water touches is captured and becomes part of the wave. Within minutes, the front face of the wall is a solid mass of debris moving hundreds of miles per hour. The devastation is extreme. As the Earth reverberates, the secondary waves begin. These are smaller waves compared to the first, but they're still hundreds of feet high, and they pummel the coasts over and over and over again. About 24 hours later, the Earth settles. Volcanoes continue to erupt, and there are thousands of earthquake aftershocks, but most of the violence is over. This is the worst day in human history. But here's what's really scary. The scenario I just described has happened many times. So a question for the skeptics: how much evidence of human civilization would be left after this type of event? Skeptics say there would be evidence of trash, plastic, and steel. But would there? After the comet strike, the fireball, the shock waves, the 1,000-mile-an-hour wind, the string of mega tsunamis, I'm not sure how much of anything would be left after that. Now, you would think that this event would leave a mess of debris across the landscape, but it would be nothing like that. The land would be pristine. Well, pristine in a way. From horizon to horizon is mud. Nothing but mud. Everything has been pulverized into dust. Any object larger than a basketball is buried under mud 1,000 feet deep. Big Archaeology says there was no early civilization because they haven't found one. Or maybe they just haven't dug deep enough. There's evidence of an ancient advanced civilization in myths and legends from cultures around the world. Not just evidence that a civilization was here, but also how it was destroyed. The Book of Revelation describes events that could be interpreted as impacts.
And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Revelation 6.
That sounds exactly like the impact I described earlier. The stars fall to the earth, the darkness, the mighty wind, and earthquakes strong enough to move mountains. In Indian texts, the Vedas and the Mahabharata, they contain descriptions of celestial events and weapons that have been interpreted as comet or meteor impacts.
Gigantic elephants burnt by that weapon fell all around, uttering fierce cries loud as those of the clouds. Other huge elephants, scorched by that fire, ran hither and thither and roared aloud in fear, as if in the midst of a forest conflagration. Mahabharata, Book 7.
That sounds like molten ejecta hitting the earth and setting everything on fire, just like we'd expect. The Lascaux Caves in France are some of the most famous cave art ever found. One drawing called The Shaft Scene features a dying man and several animals. Researchers now say this describes a comet strike around 15,200 BC. Petroglyphs all over the world depict celestial objects with multiple tails. These have been suggested to represent the Taurid meteor swarm. This petroglyph from Forsyth County, Georgia is a star map. It suggests a comet impact event in 536 AD. Ice core samples from Greenland confirm an impact sometime between 533 and 540. That impact had global ramifications and cooled the Earth over 5 degrees. There are more examples of impacts, and these are just the most obvious ones. And notice that they're not all from thousands of years ago. Some are from just hundreds of years ago. The Tunguska event in 1908 is thought to be a Taurid meteor that strayed from the debris field. These impacts happen periodically, and they usually happen in the autumn when we cross the Taurid debris field. And maybe that's the story being told on the Vulture Stone at Göbekli Tepe. Not the story of what happened in the past, but the potential danger we face right now. The Taurid comets come every year, September to November. This year, the Taurid comets peak on November 6th. You can see them for yourself. Now, sure, most of them look like shooting stars, but some of them are fireballs that light up the entire sky. Now, why does big archaeology and every world government discount this story? Because there's not a thing they can do about it. Every time we pass through the Taurid comet cloud, we're playing Russian roulette. Every year, a new spin of the chamber, a new pull of the trigger. Now, chances are, when we pull the trigger, all we hear is a click. But there are objects in the Taurid cloud that are a mile wide. So even though the chance is small, there is a chance, a real chance, that one of those objects will find its way to us. And when that happens, our civilization ends once again. And there will be only a handful of survivors. the few people lucky enough to hide in mountain caves. And maybe those survivors will create cave paintings or rock carvings describing this world-ending event. However they do it, they'll want to tell our story, and it's an important one. Every year we take our chance with the Taurids. One year we're going to lose. Then the only thing left of us, our entire civilization, will be one more very short story. Thank you so much for hanging out today. My name is AJ, that's Hacklefish.
We do not joke about the Clintons.
That's true, we don't. This has been a Y-Files compilation episode, and I hope you were able to learn some new stuff, but if you didn't, I still appreciate you checking in. Now we're back next week with a new episode. We'll be talking about the dark side of DARPA. And yes, it's a scary episode. Anyway, a few plugs. Don't forget that the Y-Files is also available as a podcast. Twice a week, I dive deeper into the stories we explore on the channel and share episodes that wouldn't make it to YouTube. Look for the Y-Files Operation Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Now, if you want to connect with like-minded folks who share our love for the weird, join the Y-Files Discord. It's a fun, active community with thousands of members, and it's completely free to join. And stay up to date with all things Y-Files by checking out our production calendar at theyfiles.com/Cal. There you'll find upcoming episodes, podcast releases, live streams, and everything else happening with the channel. And finally, a heartfelt thank you to our amazing patrons who make this channel possible. Each and every episode of the Y-Files is dedicated to our Patreon members. Without your help, this channel simply wouldn't exist. I'm grateful for you each and every day. Now, if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a member on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to perks like the videos early without commercials, access to merch only available to members, plus 2 private live streams every week just for you. I think it's the best perk that Patreon members get. You even have the chance to turn on your camera, hop on stage, and chat with the entire Y-Files team. It's nice. You get to know us as people, because we're actually people. Well, most of us are. Another great way to support the channel is grab something from the Y-Files store.
Go get a Hacklefish t-shirt, or one of them mugs that you put your fist in, just like it's my face, or a hoodie, or something with my face on it, or one of these deck of cards with my face on it, or one of these squeezy animal stuffed talking doll fishy toys.
Those are the plugs, and we'll be back next week with the dark side of DARPA. Until then, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated.
In Area 51, a secret code inside the Bible said I would. I love my UFOs and paranormal fun, as well as music, so I'm singing it like I should. But then another conspiracy theory becomes the truth, my friends, and it never ends. No, it never ends. I feel the crap cat and got stuck inside Mel's hole with MK Ultra being only too aware. Did Stanley Kubrick fake the moon landing alone on a film set, or were the shadow people there? The Roswell aliens just fought the smiling man, I'm told, and his name was Cold. And I can't believe I'm dancing with the fishes. Hacklefish on Thursday nights with AJ2, and the Wi-Fi's helping me all through the night. All I ever wanted was to just hear the truth, so the Wi-Fi's helping me all through the night. The Mothman sightings and the solar storm still come to Agatha, the secret city underground. Mysterious number stations, planet Serpo 2, Project Stargate, and what the Dark Watchers found. We're in a simulation, don't you worry though. The Black Knight satellite